Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If All Might Died? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya couldn't hear anything. The crumbling buildings around them, the helicopter above, even the far-off screams were silent. Nothing could break through the thick, viscous barrier of dripping blood, each droplet washing over his five senses like a gunshot. His mind felt like an abused drum, wishing nothing more than for the next beat to never come. It did, and it wouldn't stop anytime soon. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. Izuku sniffled. Izuku did his best to wipe his tears away, but it only smeared more blood on his face. Giving up, he threw his whole body against the wound, putting everything into slowing the blood loss. He only succeeded in bathing himself in red. The recipient eased him off, never betraying how Izuku's attempts were meaningless. None of this, the large man coughed, blood trickling out of his nose, is your fault, my boy. Izuku tried to apply pressure to All Might's wound again, his tears doubling, but the man refused. Why, yes it is. If I hadn't gotten in your way, if you hadn't protected me, you wouldn't have gotten hurt. Izuku cried out. It was true. The battle caught him by chance. He'd been wandering a shopping center while his mother explored a new woman's store, not paying attention. It had been a normal, tranquil day. Shoppers were bustling, the food court smelled heavenly, and workers looked bored. Nobody had prepared for, let alone suspected, that All Might's greatest battle would intrude on their day. The scale of the fight was unimaginable to little Izuku, who'd only left his prefecture twice and had only ever seen C-list heroes battling evil. The origin of the fight could have been dozens of miles away, even 100, knowing the distance All Might could travel. The All Might toy in Izuku's back pocket burned. Izuku hiccuped, choking on his own tears, as the greatest hero, perhaps ever, looked at him with maybe the most kindness someone could muster. No, this is the villain's fault. Don't worry, young man. He'll never hurt anyone again. The hero said, a smile plastered on his face. It wasn't the wide, toothy grin that looked at him from 6 different angles in Izuku's room. He'd never seen that kind of smile before. Its depth and meaning was foreign to him. Izuku's tears slowed. If All Might could smile with a gaping hole in his stomach, perhaps he could be brave. You saved me though. You might have gotten out of here safely if you had just let me. Izuku couldn't bring himself to finish the statement. He didn't want to die, but he'd rather do so than watch his idol gored through the stomach by that monster. How was that villain so strong? What he did to All Might was unthinkable. The villain had what seemed like hundreds of quirks, all of them designed to kill or maim. Blazing hot explosions, concussive winds, bullets that grew from his skin, and even flight were used against the hero, yet All Might won in the end. His victory came with a hefty cost, however. The hole in his chest could swallow his mom's purse. Izuku felt tears leak out of his eyes again as he looked at it. It was all to protect him, a stupid kid who wandered into a battle he had no business with. All Might coughed up more blood. He didn't know what to do. Band-aids and kisses were the extent of his knowledge. At most he could apply pressure, but All Might wouldn't let him. At a complete loss and full of guilt, Izuku slipped into the older man's limp palm, threading their fingers together. It seemed to have the desired effect. All Might gave his fingers a squeeze, letting out a brief, wet hum. It only made Izuku feel worse. Why was he being comforted when he wasn't the one hurt? I have no regrets. I saved you. I defeated my nemesis. If I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't change anything. All Might's voice grew coarse, straining with the effort of speech. He never let it stop him, though. He never let anything stop him. Except for one thing. My quirk. The ability to slowly gather strength over time and give it to a new host. One for all. I have nobody to give it to, no successor, no son. All Might whispered to himself. The man's eyes, once a brilliant moon, were waning. Izuku hung on every word said, imprinting the speech directly onto his soul. No one had ever known All Might's quirk, and if he was the first, or last, he would listen with reverence. The dull eyes slid over to the little boy holding his hand. Izuku said nothing as his savior gazed at him with an intense glint in his dying eyes. Izuku didn't think he had the guts to match the dying man's gaze, but he pushed on. Be brave, he told himself like a mantra. Remember how it felt to watch the villain maim him and for All Might to fight through it. Remember how he wanted to be like that, to be dependable, strong and mighty. To inspire, to help. Remember how he wanted to be a hero like All Might. Be brave. He poured everything he wanted to be through his eyes, and though it was close, it was enough. Izuku held the contact. All Might's grin shifted into something different, another foreign expression. Wolfish and somber, grave and wild. It had the adrenaline of a warrior and the reservation of a judge. Izuku felt like he was looking at a king. Can you live your life with honor, in service to others? Do you, he winced, want to be a hero? All Might asked. Izuku stared at the man, his gaze pulled to the wound. The answer was yes. Izuku wanted to be a hero more than anything. Yes, he could live with honor and yes, he could live in service to others. How can I be a hero if I killed you? Izuku asked, the dam broken and unleashing his tears once more. All Might didn't hesitate with his response. Never forget that you didn't put this hole in me, all for one did. I chose this. Just like how? I choose you. With inhuman will and effort, All Might dipped their linked hands into the warm blood spreading beneath them. Be the knife. I believe in you, young man. With that, All Might lifted their hands into Izuku's agape mouth, pouring his spilled blood into the boy's mouth. Izuku spluttered and gagged, not wanting to drink blood, but he couldn't help swallowing a little bit. All Might relaxed, allowing their linked hands to drop to the floor. Soon, All Might's chest stopped its unsteady rise and fall and his hand grew cold. As the helicopter above the two landed, a team of EMTs rushed over to the body. After checking the body and applying pressure to the wound that had long since stopped bleeding, a crying Imi shook her head at her crew. The symbol of peace was dead. It took less than a day for the entire planet to know All Might had passed. Fear, outrage, and disbelief came first. Riots came and went. Monuments rose. Violent crime doubled within a month. Within 4 months, the crime had tripled. To combat the crime, the Japanese police force doubled in size, while hundreds of part-time heroes applied for agencies across the country. Retired heroes and police came back to work for the first time in years, the most notable of which was Gran Torino. Mentor of All Might and veteran pro hero, Gran Torino was currently in the newly established Night Eye agency, waiting for a scheduled meeting with Night Eye. Usually, he'd just barge into the man's office and demand his attention, but today Night Eye made it clear he was swamped with meetings and work. Opening a new agency is a very time-consuming task, but it was necessary. The All Might agency fell through shortly after his death, and Night Eye needed the social weight that an agency gives a hero to function. Without Toshinori's legal business, Night Eye had to start from scratch. Honestly, the boy's efficiency impressed Gran Torino. Within 2 months, Night Eye had a headquarters and the legal documentation and permit to run an agency. While the Night Eye agency didn't have employees yet, it will soon. But with the lack of employees, every single document the agency handles goes straight through Night Eye. Gran Torino shivers. When he was young and still wrangling in dozens of villains a day, the paperwork was a nightmare. Not only was Night Eye still an active hero and filing his arrests by himself, he was also managing an entire building complex. It would have driven Gran Torino mad, but the lad pulls it off somehow. He's reading an article about the recent incarceration surge in a magazine he picked up from the lobby desk. Wave of crime, he mutters. More like a DMN tsunami. Despite only working part-time because of his age, he had already made 8 arrests for violent crime this week. In years past, during All Might's era of peace, he'd maybe find 2 a week. Maybe. He was about to turn the page when a little bell alerted him that Night Eye's current meeting was over. He groaned, irritated at the thought of standing up, and made his way over to the large office doors labeled Night Eye. He placed a gloved hand on the doorknob but didn't open it right away. He took in a deep breath, reminding himself of the gravity of their meeting. He turned the knob. The room was busier than before, he noted. The last time he was here, there was just a single dark oak desk in a boring room. But now there were plaques and art, with a painting of All Might during his golden age behind Nita. He nodded at the man as he got close, their partnership going back far enough to make verbal greetings redundant. As he pulled out one of the two chairs that faced the man's desk, Night Eye raised up a hand. "Sit in the other chair if you will," Night Eye said. Gran Torino looked down at the chair. He almost sat in and chortled despite the swirling thoughts in his head. There was a whoopee cushion on the seat. "Still up to your pranks, eh?" Gran Torino asked. Night Eye nodded, not an ounce of fun radiating off him. Sorahiko wasn't surprised. Despite the man's cold stone exterior, he valued jokes and pranks more than anything. In a way, it was something he learned from Toshinori, though Toshi was never one for pranks. Jokes made people smile, and if Toshi was good at one thing, it was making the people around him smile. Night Eye didn't inspire the same level of confidence, but he made up for it in the best way he knew how: pranks. But they didn't have time for pranks today. Neither of them spoke as Gran Torino sat in the unwhoopee cushioned chair, sighing in relief at being able to rest his bones. He hadn't stretched today, and his bones weren't feeling particularly nimble. The silence was awkward, but neither of them wanted to have the discussion they had scheduled a meeting for. Night Eye didn't look at him, instead fiddling with one of his gadgets. Every tick from the clock made the tension rise a smidge, but after a minute, it was too much. Gran Torino finally broke. "What are we going to do about One for All?" he asked. Night Eye gave him an odd look. "Is there anything to do? I would imagine a quirk would die with its master, not be running around unsupervised." Night Eye said with sarcasm. Gran Torino scoffed. "You know what I mean. Do we know if it's gone for sure or not?" Gran Torino asked again, but Night Eye wasn't having it. "He told us everything, Torino. He never once said anything about a successor. I know for a fact he went into that battle with All for One with the full power of the quirk. He never passed it on." Night Eye said, "You didn't know for a fact that Toshinori was going to die, despite looking into his future. Why are you so sure that he didn't give up the quirk before he died?" "Neither of us were there, he could have done anything," Gran Torino retorted. It was a low blow, but it was true. For some reason, Night Eye's future sight hadn't worked for their battle. "Shut up. You know for a fact that my future sight is never wrong. His death wasn't meant to happen. It was an anomaly." Night Eye said, "It wasn't meant to turn out this way." Night Eye trailed off. The lanky man thread his fingers together and pressed them to his forehead, covering his face from Gran Torino's view. "It wasn't my fault." All the fight that Night Eye had in him died almost as soon as it was awoken, leaving the room with an awkward air of grief. Gran Torino cleared his throat. "I know it's not your fault. That's why I'm here, to ask for your help to find the ninth, assuming he's out there somewhere." Gran Torino said quietly. Night Eye looked back up at him. "How would you suppose we do that? I don't have the time to go search everybody in the country, old man, and you're getting too old for this." I said glum. "Read my future. All of it." Gran Torino said. That gave Night Eye pause. "I don't do that anymore. If it didn't work on All Might, it isn't worth risking the future with fake knowledge in the present." Night Eye admitted. "Plus, how would looking into your future even help?" He continued. "If there is a ninth, I'd bet it'd be a kid. They're the only people innocent enough that Toshinori might have given the quirk up to in a pinch. He wouldn't risk giving it to any kind of adult, especially since they might have ulterior motives. Kids don't have those, Night." Gran Torino replied. So, if a kid suddenly has One for All, where do you think they'd end up?" Gran Torino asked. "You would." Night Eye immediately replied. Gran Torino nodded. "Yep. And if they were to use the quirk in the sports festival, I'd know. From there, I'd track them down and train them. I figure that has a high enough likelihood that if you saw me hanging out with a kid for a long time in the future, we could just track him down now." Gran Torino finished. Night Eye looked impressed. Far-fetched but possible. Night Eye didn't speak or move for a few moments, lost in thought. Gran Torino studied the boy's face as he wrestled with the pros and cons in his head. Suddenly, Night Eye cursed in realization. Sheet. If a kid has one for all and somehow uses it, he'll blow his limbs off. That quirk has gotten way too strong in the past decade. There's no way a kid could handle it. Gimme your hand. Night Eye snatched his hand and gave the older man the most intense stare he could muster. Despite suggesting it, Gran Torino felt uncomfortable with the move. He had never wanted his future seen. It felt like an invasion of his privacy, but it was an emergency. He'd seen Night Eye look into people's futures before, and it was always an awkward affair. 4 minutes at a time, Night Eye would touch a person and make intense eye contact as he combed over their future. Gran Torino prepared for this long exchange, but had barely settled down from his initial surprise when Night Eye suddenly jumped up from his sitting position and released Gran Torino's hand. What's wrong? Don't tell me I die in like an hour or something? Gran Torino asked. Night Eye shook his head while rushing to put on a business coat. No, but I saw some sort of explosion in your afternoon almost as soon as I started. We need to head down to Mizudafu and evacuate before we continue looking for the ninth. Night Eye replied in a hurry. Alert the HN to evacuate from the forest south of Aldra Middle School. Night Eye continued. Gran Torino nodded. Izuku Midoriya was not okay. It was a simple but hard-hitting truth that Inko had to grapple with every day. There were obvious signs of this, of course. One could see him in therapy and make the connection, but one might not understand the level of disconnect between who her baby was before and after the incident. Inko clutched her blouse over her heart at the thought. She was at her office job, her main job, and was on the clock, but couldn't help but let her mind wander. Izuku had therapy later today, and her pockets were feeling it. After the incident, Inko babied her son for weeks until officially signing him up for therapy. The extensiveness of the therapy that Izuku needed was expensive, but luckily her insurance barely covered it. That didn't mean that she didn't need to pick up a second job, though. She caught a glimpse of her reflection on her dark laptop and sighed, picking at the loose skin on her jaw and dark circles under her eyes. She was losing weight from the stress, something she might have celebrated if it didn't hurt so much. She sighed. Whatever she was going through, it wasn't anything compared to Izuku. Nothing shames her more than her actions that day. Allowing Izuku to wander around a busy mall was bad enough, but being too late to find him before she was forcibly evacuated? She will never forgive herself. She wasn't exactly sure what happened between All Might and her son. Izuku can hardly talk about it, but she knows from the paramedics that he held the hero's hand as he died. It was such a strange and disturbing thought. He had been a pillar of the country since she was a little girl, and had been the #1 hero for almost as long. Izuku had latched onto the man's image, just as she had done when she was his age, but with more fervor. He had the toys, the posters, the merchandise. All Might's iconography was practically printed into her son's very soul. He might have grown out of it one day, perhaps in a decade or so, but he never got the chance. At the height of his admiration, his hero was killed protecting him. She loves All Might every day for it. He gave everything for her son. If she had a spare fortune, she would give some to Izuku, and then donate the rest to his next of kin in thanks. But she didn't have a spare fortune, or even enough to pay rent this month. She sighed, booting up her laptop in an attempt to get back to work. She hopes Izuku's doing okay at home. Off in the distance, an explosion lights up the sky. They took Night Eye's car, so Gran Torino got to experience what the man's driving was like. It was terrible. The man sped like a demon, didn't slow for turns, and was only just able to parallel park without hitting someone's truck. As they hopped out of the car, Gran Torino saw a handful of heroes he didn't recognize walk out of the forest to their far left, either carrying or walking hand in hand with hikers who might not have gotten the message all the way out in the woods. Night Eye called them over to them. Okay, we have approximately 16 minutes to evacuate the whole area. Be back in this spot before that. We are out of range of the blast here. Night Eye called out. A hero, a darker-skinned man with dreads and a full-body suit with several mysterious capsules around his arms spoke up. Is it a bomb? I can defuse, or at least contain the blast with my barrier pods. Gran Torino gave the man's arms a bit more of a look, but Night Eye didn't give them the time to think about it. I don't know, I saw this in a future vision. I only saw the blast, not what caused it. Remember, be back in 15 minutes. Go, go, go. Night Eye ordered. Gran Torino nodded and took a deep breath, directing the air into his legs, launching himself into the forest like an elderly bullet. For most heroes, 15 minutes may be enough time to collect a handful of stragglers, but Gran Torino wasn't most heroes. Despite old age chipping away at his stamina and speed, he had immense experience and was still powerful. He could navigate the forest faster than any of the B-list heroes gathered today. In his prime, he was even able to outspeed Nana, the seventh wielder of One for All. Of course, One for All grew exponentially under Toshinori. Their speeds weren't even comparable anymore. Gran Torino found an elderly couple on a small, hilly path immediately. He didn't have time to explain, so he just scooped them up and carried them to safety. It was somewhat funny. Gran Torino had shrunk with age, but the couple were still a fair bit younger than him and much taller. It was like a child carrying his parents. He shook his head out of those intrusive thoughts and went back to work. He worked faster and faster, burning through his quirk like he wasn't pushing 70. A homeless man, a rude blonde school, 3 young women, a pothead, who he gave a stern look, and a few more were zipped from their hike to safety in under 10 minutes. On his 9th trip into the woods, he took a small breather. His quirk, Jet, was incredible, but recently it had become easier and easier for him to become quirk exhausted. For him, that meant that the air in his lungs slowly leaked out, making him short on breath. He sat on a trail bench for a few seconds, catching what little breath he could hold, when he spotted a splotch of bright red to his right. Quickly turning, he saw an odd sight. A little boy, no older than 10, was punching some random oak tree. His bright red shoes were filthy, like he had been here for hours. He got up from the bench and made his way over to the kid, knowing that getting them both out of here was going to hurt if his quirk was already exhausted. His phone buzzed in his pocket. 4 minutes remaining. Hey kid, the hell are you doing out here? There's an evacuation order. Gran Torino called out. The kid, who Gran Torino noted had bloody fists, rubbed raw from the tree bark, didn't acknowledge him. Incensed, the older man grabbed the boy's shoulder and turned to face him to get his attention. The boy's expression gave him pause. It was a tired, haunted look you never really see in kids. Not all kids are bubbly and happy, but even the least happy of them usually look neutral. This kid was different. His eyes were a dull, unhappy green. When they made eye contact, the boy didn't even appear to recognize that there was a person in front of him. Shaking his shoulder from the older man's grasp, the boy went back to punching the tree, leaving it more and more bloody with every hit. Did you not hear me? There's some sort of bomb in the forest. We need to get you to your mother. Gran Torino said. This time, the boy appeared to hear him. Sorry, she's at work. Guess you should just leave me be. The boy mumbled, neutral at the news of the bomb. This gave the hero pause. Am I hearing you right? I can't just leave you be. What are you even doing out here? Gran Torino asked. Punching this tree, hoping my quirk kicks in. I know I have one, but I've never been able to use it. Figured today was the day to try. The boy replied. He paused, then continued. You can leave if you want. I'll just stay out here. For the life of him, Gran Torino couldn't read this kid, but he wasn't going to let some brat stay behind just because he didn't want to be rescued. He's dealt with hundreds of these idiots throughout his career. People who don't think a situation is dangerous at all and don't want to be rescued are surprisingly common, usually in natural disasters. He's met plenty of morons who don't think very highly of typhoons. Boy, I can't be doing that. Whether you like it or not, I'm taking you out of here. Gran Torino said, picking up the boy and slinging him over his shoulder. The boy starts squirming and wiggling almost immediately, intent to escape from the older man's grasp, but Gran Torino wouldn't let him. His pocket buzzed. 3 minutes. Despite the quirk exhaustion, Gran Torino took as big a breath as he could and started bouncing from tree to tree, propelling himself towards the city with the unruly child complaining all the while. Let me go. Let me go back. I deserve it. The brat says, kicking and screaming. Gran Torino doesn't have the breath to reply and focuses on getting to the city faster. In the process, though, his grip loosens. The kid uses took the opportunity to jump out of the man's grasp. Sheet! Gran Torino yells, despite himself. The kid did the equivalent of jumping out of a moving car on the highway. Now, exhausted and weakened, he has to slam on the brakes and turn around. By the time he's able to slow to a stop, the kid is already running back where they came. The hero curses as his legs refuse to shoot any air, the quirk exhaustion denying him his powers. He starts to run for the kid like a quirkless plebeian, yelling the whole time. "Get back here, brat, we're running out of time." He yells ahead. "Could. Then get out of here. Let me go, I deserve to die here." The boy calls back, still running strong. Gran Torino doesn't know what the hell the kid means by that, but he can hear a faint crack in his voice. Despite the evident hesitation, the boy was still running strong. "You don't deserve anything except a DMN spanking. Whatever you did, it doesn't matter." Gran Torino yells, breathless. "He's too old for this. You don't understand, Dash. The kid was cut off by a root, tripping him at the base of a tree." The old man took this chance to catch up to the boy, but paused when he saw what the boy was doing. Having foregone trying to escape the aging hero, the child was attacking the tree with a scary fervor. He didn't know what to do while he watched the kid try to destroy the tree with reckless abandon. Blood was squirting out of his fingers as he attacked the tree, desperate for something, anything, to happen. The boy was starting to hit the tree harder and harder, holding nothing back. Gran Torino didn't immediately grab him, reminded of a rabid dog, and caught his breath. "What?" Gran Torino took a moment, sking in as much air as possible. "Am I missing? You're like 10, whatever you think you did wrong, I forgive you. Please, just come with me to safety. We're already running out of time." Gran Torino yelled. All he wanted at this moment was to get the kid to safety, but he couldn't do it if the kid was going to fight him. He thought his little speech would have been enough, but it only seemed to fuel the fire as the boy only started to cry harder. The kid climbed to his feet, still throwing careless blows at the tree. He starts muttering under his breath, which sounded something like a desperate prayer. "Please, please, 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 Dash," he muttered. The old hero's phone vibrated in his pocket, reminding him of the dwindling seconds they had left. "We're out of time. Whatever you think you did, you need to forgive yourself so we can get out of here." Gran Torino screamed. "You don't get it." Dash. The little boy's wild, flailing form started to glow a dull red color as if a light bulb had gone off beneath his skin. Killed Dash, all the luminosity see itself into his left arm as he reared back for a huge punch, his arm lighting up like a signal beam. Gran Torino stared, mouth agape. He'd seen that light a million times. Oh my God. All might. The kid's golden fist exploded forward faster than a rocket. He's the ninth. When Izuku Midoriya's knuckles touched the tree, everything went white. Inko's gut was twisting itself in knots as she watched Izuku take his first steps in over a month. She had been anxious for this moment. The hospital had cared for Izuku for weeks, and even when they relinquished him to Inko, he was still wheelchair-bound. Despite having suffered virtually no injuries in his legs, Izuku's ability to walk properly had been hindered. That was why this moment was so important, and why Inko desperately wanted to help her son. She wanted him to be as comfortable as possible for his first few moments of independence in over 4 weeks. The only thing stopping her from rushing over and helping her son herself was the physical therapist who was guiding Izuku in her stead. Her eyes burned as she watched him wobble around the room, still unused to the state of his body. "Good job, honey. I'm so proud of you." Inko calls out. Izuku glances at her for a second but turns away, unable to look her in the eye. Inko followed his gaze to the mirror on the opposite wall. She could only see Izuku's face indirectly, but she could read him like a book. His face was stone cold. Traumatized. Broken. It was all the things a little boy's face shouldn't have, but there was something underneath. Something she couldn't quite define yet. The therapy continued, with the physician coaching Izuku on his posture and balance. Izuku exhausted himself with his efforts throughout the session. He was more confident on his feet because of it, but he needed a break. Leaving the boy to rest in his wheelchair, the physician made her way over to Inko. "He's doing great for his first session, ma'am. I know how tough this is for the both of you, but be proud." He's taking to the situation better than most. A lot of kids struggle to find their balance within the 5 sessions, let alone the first. The woman spoke. Inko glanced at her name tag. She hadn't caught her name when scheduling the appointment, too stressed to care about the small detail. Thank you, Ms. Utsushimi. It's hard, but we'll get through it. With your help, of course. Inko replied, glancing at Izuku to check on him. Ms. Utsushimi smiled. Yes, of course. You'll be emailed your schedule for the next few months by the end of the week, ma'am. Have you contacted your insurance on how you'll pay? If not, I can direct you to my own insurance. Their healthcare is very good. Ms. Utsushimi said. At this, Inko shifted in place, her stomach queasy. No thank you, my health insurance is also fine, but it won't be necessary. The therapy is being covered by someone else. Inko said. It was uncomfortable to admit, but she wasn't even close to being well off enough to afford what her son was going through. She didn't lie, however. Izuku's therapy really was being covered by someone else, 2 heroes in fact. All Might's famous sidekick, Night Eye, and another hero, an older man by the name of Gran Torino. She didn't know why Night Eye was helping fund her son's therapy, but she wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Gran Torino, on the other hand, wasn't a mystery. She had met him when he had recovered Izuku's body during the explosion and had offered to pay for his expenses. Inko couldn't say that was a typical response to saving someone, but when she'd refuted him, he'd doubled down, offering Night Eye's wealth as a bonus. Money was too tight to repay them, but she planned on giving them both of them some kind of gift or meal. Oh, well, that's certainly kind of them. I know how hard being a single mother is, especially the more expensive parts. I have a little girl at home, you know. Ms. Utsushimi said. Inko nodded, a small smile on her face. Oh, what's her name? Inko asked. Ms. Utsushimi's face lit up at the chance to talk about her daughter. Oh, well, her name is Kami. Sweetest little thing, but talks my ear off whenever I'm home. I have a photo of her on my desk, right over there dash. Ms. Utsushimi paused in her gushing when she looked over to her desk, where Inko saw Izuku had wheeled himself over and was studying the framed photos. The 2 moms walked over to Izuku, where they found him studying the picture of a little blonde girl who Inko could only assume was Kami. Izuku looked at them in surprise when they came over, quickly putting the photo down. Sorry for touching it, I was just curious. Izuku mumbled without inflection, but Inko could see his ears turn pink at being caught. Ms. Utsushimi wasn't mad, though she was beaming. She gave a small clap and bounced in place before speaking. No problem. That's Kami, my daughter. Maybe you'll meet her sometime. I like to take her down here sometimes so she can see me work. Ms. Utsushimi said, before continuing. She has the most interesting little quirk, and she's obsessed with becoming a hero one day. I'm so happy to have my job. It gives me a great opportunity to help her do what makes her happy, be it coaching her on her quirk or making sure she doesn't hurt herself from quirk exhaustion. Inko felt a pang of guilt in her chest as the physician continued to gush about how her daughter wanted to be a hero. She knew her son, at least before the incident, had wanted to be a hero more than anything. She would love it if her son could grow up and follow his dreams, but she had never really been sure if it was possible or not, with Izuku being quirkless. Especially now, her quirkless little boy had been battered and bruised beyond anything she'd ever seen. She doesn't want him to be a hero. She doesn't want him to get hurt ever again. She prays Izuku could let go of that dream, especially now that he was missing an arm. She allowed the woman to continue about her daughter for a few minutes, silent and stewing in guilt. She didn't want Izuku to feel even worse about himself than she knew he already did, but she also didn't want to be rude. Inko glanced down at Izuku in worry, expecting to see her son looking uncomfortable or even tearing up. What she didn't expect, however, was for a feeble smile to be teetering on his lips. It was a weak, pitiful thing, but it was the first one she had seen on her son in months. Despite all the trauma and pain her son had gone through, his smile sent butterflies down her chest and blood through her heart. She lived for his joy, and she hadn't felt alive in quite a while. You said she wanted to be a hero? I hope she does her best. I used to want to be a hero, but I'm not so sure anymore. Izuku said, lifting up his residual limb, what used to be his left arm, for clarity. Ms. Utsushimi stopped her rambling, her shoulders slumped. She had gotten carried away. Inko watched as the woman knelt down on one knee in front of Izuku, cupping the back of his head with her hand. Listen. I know you might feel a little lost on what to do, and I'm not one to put ideas in anyone's head, the woman glanced at Inko as she said this. But just because you lost an arm, doesn't mean you lost anything important. It's just an arm. You're still the person you were before, arm or not. She said, her voice so soft that Inko almost didn't hear her. Inko's eyes welled up for the second time today, but she didn't let the tears fall. Wiping her eyes so nobody could see her cry, she gently patted Izuku on the shoulder. She's right, honey. She's right. Inko was wheeling Izuku to the train station when her phone buzzed. After boarding the train and getting Izuku's chair into a safe place, she checked her notifications. One message from Gran Torino showed up on her timeline, and she decided to read it now. Gran Torino, I think it's time to have a meeting to discuss what happened to Izuku. Inko wasn't sure what to make of this, so she replied with a simple request for a time and place. Not 2 minutes later, she got a reply. Gran Torino, could we discuss this tonight? I know managing the boy in public is a hassle, so Night Eye and I could come to your apartment. Around dinner time? Don't bother making us food, we don't want to impose. Inko was surprised that Night Eye, All Might's famous sidekick and her mysterious healthcare patron would be joining them, but she agreed. She sent them a link to her apartment complex and room number before turning off her phone, needing time to think peacefully. Who was that, Mom? Izuku asked. Oh, that was that older man who saved you as well as… They'll be coming tonight, I assume to discuss finances. Inko replied. Izuku shrank down into his chair, discomforted by the thought of those men coming over. Do they have to? Can't you just do it over a call? Izuku asked, hopeful. Inko shook her head but was understanding. Izuku didn't want to see Night Eye, because he reminded him of All Might. Izuku and Inko had stripped Izuku's room of All Might merchandise after Inko realized that he was uncomfortable in his own room. It hadn't taken Inko long to put 2 and 2 together. Izuku, in the following weeks after the incident, shut down in public whenever All Might was referenced. When Inko had mentioned this fact to his therapist, he had immediately recommended they hide away all memorabilia of the late hero until Izuku was ready. They hadn't thrown any of it out. The stuff could be worth a small fortune in a couple of years. It was kept under lock and key, far away from Izuku. Unfortunately, Night Eye was donating so much money to them that Inko couldn't even consider refusing his appearance. Sorry, honey. If you want, I'll make you some food when we get home so you can stay in your room all night. She offered. Izuku hesitantly nodded, and that was that. Around 7 p.m. Inko's doorbell rang. As soon as it did, Inko ferried Izuku a glass of water and closed his room door so she could tackle whatever these heroes wanted by herself. She didn't want to trigger Izuku in any way, so she wanted to finish this quickly. She braced herself before she opened her door, but was still stunned by her guests. Night Eye was much taller than she thought, easily towering over her and almost having to duck into her doorway to get in. And despite the large difference in stature, Gran Torino was just as imposing as his companion as they walked through the door. Hello. Welcome to my home, would you like anything to drink? She offered, careful to be as polite as possible. Night Eye shook his head. No thank you, ma'am. He said. Gran Torino didn't follow the lead of his taller companion and asked for some hot tea. Inko nodded and poured the older man his tea as the trio sat at the dinner table. All right, now that we're settled, what are you gentlemen here to discuss? If it's finances, my credit history is listed in the filing cabinet dash. Inko was interrupted by Night Eye, who shook his head. No. We'll continue to pay Izuku's medical fees, no questions asked. We are here for a different, delicate reason. Night Eye said, pushing his glasses up his long nose. Inko hesitantly nodded. Okay, so what is it? She asked. Neither man said anything for a few seconds, as if they were debating who should speak. Finally, the older man spoke up. Your son's quirk, ma'am. We need to decide what to do about it. Inko tilted her head in confusion. Quirk? I don't think you understand. My son is quirkless. Always has been, she said. She refrained from getting defensive, but it was rather rude and strange for these men to ask about her son's quirk. Both men looked uncomfortable. I guess this makes things simpler if your son hasn't told you anything yet. We can set the facts straight. Night Eye said, before continuing. I know this is a sensitive subject, but are aware of why your son lost his arm? Inko gaped at him. Of course I am. What do you take me for? There was some bomb, or a villain attack. Whatever the cause, an explosion stole my baby's arm. Inko cried, offended and enraged. Gran Torino put his hands up in a surrender gesture. I understand this is hard on you, Ms. Midoriya, but there was no bomb that day. There wasn't even a villain. The older man said, slow and clear. The thing that blew up his arm was his own strength, or rather, the strength of All Might's quirk. Inko didn't know what to say. Night Eye slipped his way back into the discussion. Listen, ma'am. This is to never be shared with anyone. Only a handful of heroes and the elite of Japan's government are aware of this. Night Eye took in a deep breath before continuing, his eyes glowing with intensity. All Might's quirk, one for all, is the ability to give a bank of energy to someone. It's an old quirk that has been slowly growing stronger for the past few centuries. The last person to hold this quirk was All Might. Why are you telling me this? You can't be seriously trying to tell me that. Inko trailed off, unable to digest what she was being told. Night Eye leaned forward, purple light refracting in his eyes. All Might gave your son one for all before he passed on. Your son knows this, at least to a certain point, and used it to devastating effect, both on the forest downtown and himself. Izuku did that himself. Night Eye said, emphasizing every word. It was harsh, but Inko needed to understand. Izuku hurt himself? By using some absurd quirk given to him by that man All Might? Are you insane? Inko yelled at the lanky man. She balled her fists, knocking her chair over as she stood up. Who do you think you are, to come to my house and lie to me? Gran Torino stood up, matching her movements, but with as little hostility as he could muster. Hands raised in defeat, he walked around the table to Inko, careful to give no offense. I promise you, ma'am, we aren't trying to pull your leg. We aren't trying to offend you in any way. I'm a former teacher at UA, and I spent my time there teaching All Might the ropes of heroism. We didn't always get along, but I promise that I know his quirk inside and out. I was even friends with the person who had won for all before him. When I saw your brat crying and screaming last month, I saw what he did. He glowed like a light bulb and punched a tree so hard that his arm was blown clean off, alongside most of the forest in front of him. It was a perfect imitation of All Might. Gran Torino said. Inko, despite not wanting to believe this, couldn't sense the lie. She calmed herself, but she was still on the verge of crying her eyes out. The older man got close enough to put his hand on her shoulder. I know this is a lot. It's a lot for us too. Our friend has only recently passed and we only just found out that he gave his quirk to a brat. Gran Torino continued. Night Eye, still sitting still at his seat, spoke up. What you saw happen to your child is the result of him using the quirk without any self-restraint or self-preservation. This is why we came. We have a solution so that he'll never hurt himself with the quirk like that again. Night Eye said his edge has disappeared, but he was still serious. Inko, overwhelmed with this roller coaster of a discussion, couldn't hold in her waterworks anymore. Unbothered, Night Eye continued. Your son isn't stuck with this curse. I suggest you convince him to give up the quirk entirely. All he would have to do is consent to someone consuming a small part of his DNA. Inko hiccuped, her tears still streaming out of her eyes. Really? She asked. My baby would never hurt himself again? Of course, ma'am. The second we find a suitable host, your son could be safely quirkless within the day. Night Eye said. Gran Torino awkwardly coughed into his fist. We can't force him to give it up, of course. In that case, I would be willing to take him under my wing, so that an accident like what happened in the forest could never happen again. Regardless of what he chooses, your son will be okay. At this, Night Eye glared at Gran Torino, but Inko was too busy crying to notice. Inko slowly sat back down, her hands trembling as she placed them flat upon the table. She took a deep breath. I need time to think this through. I would appreciate it if you leave. I'll reach back out when Izuku and I have talked about it. Inko said with her most firm tone, but even she knew her voice was shaking. The two men nodded, Night Eye stood up, and both men made their way out. Before Night Eye was fully out the door, he looked back at Inko, who was still at the dining table. If you want what's best for your son's health and the future of our country, you should make him give it up. With that, he closed the door behind him, leaving the apartment in uncomfortable silence. Inko sighed as she laid her head down on the table, too exhausted to sit up straight. Before she closed her eyes and fell asleep though, she made eye contact with Izuku, who had been watching the whole exchange with his door slightly ajar. Hello, Ms. Midoriya. Ms. Utsushimi called as Inko walked into her office hand in hand with Izuku. It had been about a week since their last visit and Inko's eventful conversation with the heroes. Today, they had decided to leave the wheelchair behind. Izuku had been practicing his walking all week and had pretty much got it down, save for the occasional stumble. Inko smiled at the physician, doing her best to put aside all the thoughts swimming in her head about Izuku and his quirk. Hello, Ms. Utsushimi. How are you? Inko asked. Great. Oh, Midoriya, I have a surprise for you. I brought along a little spectator with me today, so I'll leave you some time to play with her if you want. Kami, say hello. Popping out from behind Ms. Utsushimi, a little girl who Inko thought must have been a clone of the grown woman stepped out. Hi. It's nice to meet you. Ooh, your hair is green. Is it dyed or dash? Kami Utsushimi's excited babbling was interrupted by her mother, who shushed her. All right, Midoriya. Do you want to work on balance, or do you want to try to practice writing? Ms. Utsushimi asked. The rest of the session went by rather fast. Izuku did odd poses to work on fine-tuning his balance, as well as opening and closing things like boxes and doors. It warmed Inko's heart to see her son begin to recover and improve. While Izuku was working on bending over and getting back up, Inko found her mind wandering back to the problem at hand. She hadn't spoken to Izuku whatsoever about her meeting with the two heroes, but she knew that he had been watching the conversation go down. He knew everything about the quirk, about being able to give it up, everything. Despite knowing that he knew, she couldn't bring herself to talk to him about it. Perhaps it was because of her guilt. Despite knowing that her son could never be a quirkless hero, she had let him live his lie, just to let him have something to strive toward. She loved her son more than anything, but she knew that Izuku, physically speaking, had never been anything special. He was small, he was scrawny, even for a kid his age, and he didn't have powers. He was just a normal human kid. And now, because of a superpower he wasn't born with, he was permanently disabled. She should be horrified. Perhaps she should even be mad. All Might, despite his graces, had cursed her son with his dying wish. Maybe she should hate him. Maybe she does hate him. But deep down, she knows why she is so conflicted. She knows why she doesn't want to march into Izuku's room, make him give her a blood sample, and ship one for all off to some up-and-coming hero who has 2 arms and a quirk. She knows why she doesn't want to take this from him, even though it gave him a wound he'll never recover from. She didn't want to take away the one thing he's always wanted, powers. It would kill her to let her son lose his left arm and get nothing in return. In her mind, despite the objective horror and danger this quirk represented, her son had earned the power, he had paid for it in blood. If Izuku even vaguely suggested that he'd be okay with giving up one for all, she would make him do it in a heartbeat. She desperately wanted him to be happy and fulfilled, but she wasn't sure with it being at the cost of his safety. Inko shook her head, clearing her thoughts. She would talk to him tonight. Inko looked over to where Izuku was. Ms. Utsushimi had kept her promise and had ended their session early so that he and Kami could play. Inko must have zoned out for so long that she missed the transition from PT to playtime. She made her way over to another set of chairs in the office, close enough to eavesdrop without being noticed. So, how did you lose your arm? Kami asked, rolling a rubber ball across the floor to Izuku. Inko almost choked at the bold question. Oh, It got blown up. My quirk kinda went haywire, I guess. Izuku replied, unbothered by the question. Cammy tilted her head in interest. What kind of quirk blows off your arm? Are you really strong? Izuku gave her a tired smile before rolling the ball back to her with a little difficulty. Well, I'm not sure you could call me strong, since, my arm got blown off. Your mom said you wanted to be a hero? Izuku asked. Cammy beamed at him, catching the ball between her legs. I think it would be pretty fun, and helping people is cool. My mom she gestured over to Ms. Utsushimi, who was hard at work on her laptop, apparently updating a spreadsheet. Is a physical therapist, obviously. She helps people all the time, which is really cool. I want to do what she does, but with more fun. So, I'll be a hero. What about you? Do you want to be a hero? She rolled the ball back to Izuku. He frowned. Being a hero? Don't you see my arm? Izuku wiggled his stump at her as if she hadn't noticed it before. I always wanted to be a hero. I used to look up to the big guy all the time. But I think that's out of the question now. Izuku said. He rolled the ball back. Inko could tell he was getting better at it the longer their little game went on. Besides his increasing comfort with his singular arm, she was also paying a lot of attention to their childlike discussion. While she didn't want to intrude, it felt like her only opportunity to be able to understand Izuku. Mother's intuition went a long way, but it wasn't perfect. Izuku didn't actually talk to her, he didn't talk to anybody save for his therapist. She hoped he would be more open with someone his own age. So, even if you're not strong right now, your quirk seems to be. I guess it might be a little harder for you since you only have one hand, but becoming a hero was never going to be easy anyways. Cammy said, rolling the ball back to Izuku. His frown deepened. You don't get it. It was pretty unlikely for me before. Now it's impossible. People like me can't be heroes. Izuku said. He held the ball for a few seconds before lightly bouncing it to Cammy. Inko's heart ached at how dejected he sounded, how defeated he was. Cammy scoffed. That's dumb. You're being dumb. Plenty of heroes are missing limbs. Psychos? She doesn't have legs from the knees down, but her telekinesis is so cool and useful. I feel like not having feet should make it a lot harder for her to be a hero than for you to become one without one measly arm. Cammy said, bouncing the ball back to Izuku a little too hard, irritated at his words. Izuku snatched the ball out of the air with his single arm like a snake striking its prey. Inko was surprised at how snappy and efficient the movement was, but Izuku didn't even seem to notice. You still don't get it. I blew my arm off because I was upset and being careless. What if me being careless got somebody hurt or killed? Izuku mumbled out something else. Inko wasn't able to catch all of it, but she swore it sounded something like, again. That's what practice is for, dummy. Just keep practicing until you don't make dumb mistakes like that, and you'll be fine, 2 arms or none at all. Cammy said, matter-of-factly. Izuku looked down at his hand, marveling at it in silence. Do you really think I could be a hero? Even though I'm disabled? Even though I've done bad things? Izuku asked, a small whimper in his voice. Inko noticed Ms. Utsushimi closing her laptop to watch the exchange. I don't know what kind of bad stuff you did, but don't you want to help people? Cammy asked. Izuku slowly nodded, his bangs covering his eyes from Inko's view. Then you can be a hero, dummy. Izuku was silent for a few minutes as he studied his palm, his game with Cammy forgotten. Inko watched as Cammy respected the silence, silently thanking her. Izuku sat long and hard thinking, but eventually he must have had an epiphany, because he shot to his feet. He hurried to Inko, grabbing her hand and pulling her to the other side of the room, more excited than she'd seen him in a long time. Inko pretended she hadn't been eavesdropping on them and allowed herself to be taken away from the prying ears of the Utsushimis. What is it, baby? Inko asked. As she looked at her son, he gazed up at her, his bangs no longer hiding his eyes. They were full of a beautiful livelihood that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and Inko hadn't taken the time to look for it. I know. I've made mistakes. I almost died in that forest. But I need to know, if I keep his quirk, do you think I could be a hero? Izuku asked. Inko, at that moment, remembered a similar moment from a few years ago. Izuku had just been diagnosed quirkless, and he hadn't taken it well. He had cried for hours, watching old All Might clips on repeat before posing a question to Inko. Could he be a hero, even without a quirk? Back then, Inko hadn't known what to say to him. She had apologized profusely, over and over again until he fell asleep. She never told him he could be a hero, she never wanted to give him false hope. She regrets that now. Inko dropped to her knees, eye level with Izuku. She placed her hands on her son, whose eyes were shining as if he had never been hurt in the first place. She knew what to say this time. Honey, Cammy was right. You could be a hero with or without. One for all. Are you sure that you want to keep it? Inko asked, holding in her sobs as best she could. Izuku nodded, also tearing up. I do. I do. I need to make it up to him. Izuku was stretching when Gran Torino blindsided him, sending him sprawling on the floor. In the corner of his eye, Izuku saw Night Eye nodding in approval. He struggled to his feet, coughing. Why did you do that? I didn't think we were starting for like 5 minutes. Izuku said. The older man, unbeknownst to Izuku, hooked his ankle with his cane and sent Izuku back to the floor. You made a choice. A stupid, selfish choice that we can't do anything to stop. Night Eye said. His words burned Izuku's heart. They hurt worse than getting knocked flat on his butt. The world needs All Might and soon. You've decided to make the world wait until you're ready, so I hope you're ready to go through hell. He continued. Gran Torino nodded. You're too young to even attempt to weight train you, let alone let you practice one for all. Gran Torino said. I respect your decision to keep the quirk, unlike some people. The old man's eyes flicked to Night Eye. Guilt spread into Izuku's heart for a moment before his brain crushed it. Night Eye hated him even though this was their first official meeting. But that doesn't mean I can go easy on you. Starting today, we're going to turn you into the perfect vessel for one for all. And that includes preparing you for anything and everything, such as Gran Torino continued, Night Eye zipped out from behind the older man and rushed at Izuku. Night Eye reached him in a second and kicked full force at his left cheek. The only thing stopping Izuku from being decapitated was an inch of space between his face and Night Eye's heel. The man straightened back up, pushing his glasses up his nose. He looked unimpressed. You're scrawny, even for your age, and your entire left side is completely unguarded, Night Eye said. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows, grabbing at his left flank. That's not fair. I wouldn't have that problem if I had 2 arms. Izuku said, feeling defensive of his obvious disadvantage. Night Eye scoffed. But you don't, do you? That's why we're going to train on how to defend yourself and how to avoid getting hit. We'll do this every single day until you're able to either dodge my kick at full force or begin training his quirk. Night Eye said, his voice rigid. His quirk, Izuku thought. Not Izuku's, but All Might's. It hurt to be told that straight to his face, but he agreed deep down. Before he could dwell on it, Izuku glanced at Gran Torino, suddenly curious. What about him? Do I have to dodge a kick from him? Izuku asked. Gran Torino laughed. If you could dodge me before you even hit PBRY, I'd give you $1,000,000. Gran Torino said, still laughing. No, Night Eye's just being an arse. Now get runnin', brat. He continued. Izuku obliged, not wanting to embarrass himself more. Running on the indoor track, Izuku found himself trying his best to not tip over. While he was slowly adjusting to moving around and doing everyday tasks with one arm, running was a whole other issue. After he began, he quickly realized that this was going to be a lot harder than he expected. Arms play a critical role in any movement. Despite not being very heavy, they can shift your center of balance easily. Without that vital extremity, Izuku had a center of gravity that was a little too far right. It made turning right corners easier, but everything else is harder. All of a sudden, something nailed Izuku in the back of the head, sending him stumbling forward. Stopping mid-jog, he turned back to find Night Eye next to a pile of rubber dodgeball. Izuku reached up to rub where he got hit but touched nothing but air. Confused, Izuku tried again but soon realized his mistake. He didn't have a left hand. God, it was going to take a lot to get over this. Who said to stop? Keep running, brat. Gran Torino called out. Izuku did so, but not without scowling. Why'd you throw that at me? Izuku asked. Give me some time to get used to my new balance. No can do, brat. If you don't want to get hit, pay attention. Gran Torino continued, motioning for Night Eye to throw another ball at Izuku. Now running and paying attention, he was able to determine the trajectory of the ball and move out of the way with a little difficulty. You missed, oof. Ricocheting into Izuku's back off the wall, the ball knocked him to the floor. He was tired of his mentors tripping him. Within a few seconds of not getting up, another ball hit him. No breaks. So you're exercising? That's good. That's very good. Dr. Fujimaki said. Izuku nodded, uncomfortable in his chair. It wasn't a bad chair, it was soft and had a nice leather texture. No, Izuku's body was just very sore. Bruises littered his body after hours of training with Gran Torino and Night Eye. The old man had offered to mentor Izuku if he chose to keep one for all, but he hadn't expected the man to be a SLV driver. Despite the physical pain and stress of their first session, however, Izuku was thrilled with it. He was equal amounts tired and fulfilled, something he hadn't felt since he had completed his last hero journal. Did you know that working hard naturally gives you dopamine over time? When you exhaust yourself with exercise, you're manually making yourself happier. Dr. Fukimaki continued. His therapist was nice, Izuku thought. He was easy to get along with and wasn't judgmental in the slightest. Izuku was lucky to have him. Yeah, I guess. It's hard though. Izuku mumbled out. Dr. Fujimaki smiled, nodding. Yes, it is. For many people, it's a vital part of their recovery, and recovery is difficult. Dr. Fujimaki said. What brought you to exercise? You don't have to answer, of course, but I'm curious. He continued. Oh, I kindly, Izuku trailed off, unsure if he wanted to tell the truth or not. His therapist waited for him to answer, perfectly silent and relaxed. Izuku spent a good 30 seconds thinking it over before remembering his promise. He can't be ashamed of trying to avenge someone, even if he was the one who killed them in the first place. I know I'm hurt, I know I'm crippled, but I decided I want to try to become a hero again. Izuku said, eyes downcast. Dr. Fujimaki didn't say anything for a second, and Izuku thought he had upset the man somehow before he smiled. That's a lovely goal to have. I know we haven't discussed the odd circumstances with your quirk yet, but rest assured we will get there. Eventually. Quirks and heroism, they go hand in hand, so we can discuss them together at a later date. The one piece of advice I'll give you in the meantime, however, is that heroism isn't just about helping people. Dr. Fujimaki said. Izuku's eyes narrowed, confused. What? Of course it is. Heroism is giving up something of yourself for others. Izuku replied. The man shook his head. No, Midoriya, no. In today's society, heroism is just as much about self-preservation as it is self-sacrifice. People need heroes, and if all the heroes sacrifice themselves to save only a handful of people, then who would protect the masses? Dr. Fujimaki asked. Izuku was stumped. Are you trying to tell me to let people get hurt, maybe even die, just to keep myself safe? Izuku asked, suddenly defensive. Dr. Fujimaki's smile didn't falter as he raised his hands in surrender. Absolutely not, Midoriya. I wouldn't dream of telling a hero to save themselves before someone else. What I am saying is that heroes who run themselves ragged with no sense of self-preservation expire quickly. You need to take care of yourself. You need to have a life outside of heroism. Dr. Fujimaki finished. Izuku hesitantly nodded, unsure. He wasn't sure what to make of the doctor's statement. He had grown up believing that helping someone else before yourself was always a good thing, no matter what. Even his favorite hero, All Might, had reinforced this idea by dying for Izuku. All Might hadn't cared about his health, only getting the job done and protecting him. He understood the sentiment. If a hero wasn't at 100%, they wouldn't be able to work at full efficiency. If he can't train at 100%, he won't get his efforts worth. Taking care of himself? I'll try to not overwork myself, I guess. Izuku said. Dr. Fujimaki nodded. Stay safe, Emidaria. Your future is bright. Across the country, NG was grappling with something far more difficult than the average villain. Alone in his high-rise office looking down on the city below, NG was struggling with his ego, an unsolved case, and his son. He drummed his fingers on his desk. He had left his staff with a single order: do not disturb. NG needed time to digest this. This was the National Hero Rankings, the first one to be published since the death of the previous #1 hero, his rival, All Might. NG saw some interesting changes in the rankings this month. An up-and-coming hero, Hawks, had breached the top 100, despite not yet being best genist had risen from 15th to 11th. The most interesting of all, however, was the previous #2 hero, second fiddle only to All Might himself, had become the new top hero. All Might had been added to the top of the list of the Valkyries, the best of the heroes who died in service. NG Todoroki groaned as he rubbed his eyes, praying the ibuprofen would kill his headache soon. He was the #1 hero and he didn't know how to feel. Endeavor had worked single-mindedly towards this goal since he was in UA. He had worked harder than anyone, but had always fallen short of the big man himself. NG hadn't resigned himself to failure. He had married into a powerful Icequirk family in order to try and create a child strong enough to best All Might, but he had never truly expected to be #1. The gap between himself and All Might was as wide as the gap between himself now and his middle school self. Shoto had a chance to get there one day, but that didn't matter now. It didn't matter now. That was what Endeavor was hung upon. What was he supposed to do with Shoto, his ultimate tool to take down All Might, with no All Might? This dilemma was causing his headache. Or maybe it was the guilt, the retrospective realization that he had been pushing his sons so hard for a dream they'll never fulfill was drowning him. Tuya had shown so much promise, but NG put ideas into his head. Ideas that drove him, a child, into killing himself. How could NG be the #1 hero after that? All Might was the ultimate hero. Ultimate heroes didn't inspire children into suicide. A buzzer went off on his desk, indicating that somebody wanted to speak to him. NG's frown deepened. He held down the button that turned on his mic. What is it about Do Not Disturb that you do not understand? This better be worth my time. Endeavor said. On the little device on his desk, a crackly voice could be heard. I'm sorry, sir, but I thought you would like to know we have gotten some leads on the explosion in Muzutafu via the Hero Network. Burnin said. Endeavor shifted in his seat, now interested. Burnin was one of his newer sidekicks, a freshly graduated girl who could generate fire from her hair and throw it. She was on office duty until further notice, given her lack of experience, and had been relaying most of what the intelligence office came across directly to Endeavor. Go on. Endeavor said. Sir Night Eye claims to have seen the explosion in a future vision. We were never able to recover bomb pieces because there was no bomb, sir. This is confidential, even within the Hero Network, but the cause of the explosion was a quirk. Burnin explained. A villain then? That explosion was serious business. Have they been apprehended? Endeavor said, almost disappointed. He had been following the case rather closely and had been hoping to be the one to crack it. No, sir, you don't seem to understand. It wasn't a villain. It was a civilian's quirk that went haywire. We only have access to this information because of the unique line the #1 hero has in the Heroes Network, but the civilian whose quirk went crazy was a little boy, 9 years old, named Izuku Midoriya. We have nothing else, sir. Burnin said over the speaker. Endeavor was surprised. The explosion that had destroyed most of the Muzutafu forest was monstrous. NG hadn't seen such high horsepower attacks in years. If it was just a little kid, he might become a serious powerhouse in the hero industry in a decade or so. Is the brat alive? Endeavor asked. Yes, though he was apparently injured pretty bad. Burnin replied. And you thought? Do some digging on this Midoriya kid. I'm interested. Now, unless there's something else, please refrain from bothering me again. I'm going home. Endeavor said, already stripping off his hero gloves. Yes, sir. Burnin replied. NG knew the line went dead and she was gone when he heard a click from the speaker. I need a drink. He muttered. Enji was shrugging off his overcoat in the mudroom of his home when he saw Shoto. A twinge of something Enji was unfamiliar with flashed through him. Bright red scar tissue covered Shoto's left eye. It was a permanent reminder of his own failures as a father and husband. Oh, Enji realized. That twinge he felt was shame. Enji had strived to avoid thinking about his past for years, instead choosing to always look forward. He'd never take the time to look around him, and God forbid he start thinking about what has already happened. But now that he was the #1 hero, he needed to be more conscious of his mistakes. The biggest one of all, of course, was the one he had been making for over 4 years now. Shoto! Enji called over to his son. Shoto, who had attempted to walk to his room without acknowledging his father, paused. Enji didn't have to see the boy's face to know he was glowering. "What do you want?" Shoto asked, not turning back to look at him. Enji didn't know what to say, so he didn't. He let the silence hang for 5 seconds, 10, 30, and then a full minute. All the while, Shoto was still turned away from him. Finally, the boy relented and faced his father. "What do you want?" Shoto called out, irritated that Enji hadn't said anything. "Training is cancelled for the rest of the week." Enji finally let out. Shoto paused, his angry demeanor lessening but not disappearing. "Why?" he asked. What a loaded question, Enji thought. He turned away from his son. "I don't know." It was only later that Enji realized that this Midoriya Izuku kid was the same age as his son. "So, Midoriya, have you decided what you want to do about a prosthetic?" Dr. Fujimaki asked. Izuku shrugged. "I don't know. I've only just barely gotten all of my balance back from before. I don't want to throw it off again. Plus, I don't have any forearm muscles to get those expensive finger prosthetics, so it wouldn't serve any real function besides aesthetic." Izuku replied. It had been a few weeks since his last session with Dr. Fujimaki. He had spent a lot of time considering if he wanted a prosthetic. His arm was cleanly cut off right above the tricep, right at the top of where his bicep used to be. Sure, he could get an attachment with an AI hand so he could do basic two-handed tasks again, but he would never be able to punch somebody with one for all with it. Sure, he could turn the prosthetic into some sort of support item for hero work, but he wasn't sure that was something he needed. He still wasn't completely comfortable not having an arm, but the loss of it was symbolic to him. If he was able to become a hero without even having an arm, maybe somebody could become a hero without a quirk. If he wore a fake arm, that aesthetic, that inspiration to disabled kids and adults might be washed away. He didn't have to say this, because Fujimaki understood him. Perhaps he understood Izuku better than he did himself. "I understand you want to be seen as a disabled hero. It truly is an inspirational idea. But I'm not talking about some fancy piece of tech to help you with possible hero work," Dr. Fujimaki said. Izuku looked at him confused. "Then what would I need it for? I can walk, run, and use most two-handed devices with no sweat," Izuku said. The doctor gave him a warm, understanding look. "It wouldn't be for doing tasks better. You're almost independent as you were before the accident. This fake arm, it would just be there to ease your conscience," the man said. Izuku was even more confused. "Ease my conscience?" Izuku asked. Fujimaki nodded. "Yes. If you would please, can you tell me what you feel when you look at your stump? You don't need to, but I would appreciate it," he asked. Izuku furrowed his brows at the request but obliged. He looked at his stump and let his mind wander. The first thing that came up was embarrassment. A sort of awkward shame crept up in him as he gazed at his greatest weakness. His regret began to overflow as he continued to gaze at himself. Soon, other emotions popped up. A feeling of inadequacy, as if he was less of a person because of his disability, was hovering there. Its full strength had been dismissed by Ms. Utsushimi's speech to him a few weeks ago, but a part of that still lingered. There was a certain sense of grief that Izuku hadn't realized he felt until he let it flow through him. He really missed being whole. He hopes one day he'll stop feeling bad about it, but he knows he'll never forget it entirely. His body won't allow him to. The phantom pains were constant, and his body often forgot his arm wasn't there anymore and told him to use it. Eventually, he'd be able to overcome his innate reactions to use his non-existent arm, but he'd never be rid of all the phantom sensations. Finally, there was a quiet anger below it all. He hated the way people looked at him in public. Izuku hated that he lost his arm because he was throwing a tantrum. It angered him it was gone in the first place. At this revelation, he ripped his gaze from his amputation. Sweat trickled down his face and back. He was breathing raggedly and unevenly. He didn't know how long he had been looking at his arm, but it had been a long time. Eventually, he was able to collect himself enough to give a proper answer to the question. I hate the way that it's not there anymore and how it's my fault. I hate the way people look at me when I'm outside with my mom. I don't want to look at it anymore. Ever again, actually. Izuku said. Fujimaki nodded in understanding but still looked pleased. Those feelings will fade with time, my boy. But that's why I think a prosthetic is a good idea. You don't have to wear it at home or while you work, but maybe it would be a good idea to wear it, say, out on the train or in a grocery store. You'll get less attention that way. I know how cruel strangers are. He said. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. But wouldn't wearing it just put off the main issue? If I'm just pretending to have an arm, how am I supposed to get over not having one? Izuku asked. That's a good question, Midoriya. The answer is pretty simple, however. Most amputees hate the sight of whatever they're missing. They get agitated over it fairly easily and their stress builds up. The best way to avoid that buildup of stress is to just ignore it. With you, I just want you to be comfortable when you're out in public. Dr. Fujimaki replied. It made sense, Izuku thought. Izuku's goal was to master his negative feelings, but for other people it might as easy as forgetting the problem entirely. So this would be to, like, give my brain a rest? Izuku asked. Essence, yes. He answered. Izuku stayed still for a few moments, pondering the possibilities before nodding. I'll ask Ms. Utsushimi about it next week. I'll need a really light one so it won't mess up my balance though. Make sure it looks lifelike. That's the key. Fujimaki said. Yes, sir. They spent a few minutes making comfortable small talk. Izuku didn't get to talk to many people much anymore, not that he wanted to, but it was nice. Eventually, the topic of school came up. School was something Izuku hadn't been putting much thought into. He wasn't sure what his future looked like in regards to his education, besides maybe, hopefully being accepted into UA, the greatest pro-hero academy. After the incident, Izuku enrolled in remote learning. He had needed time to get away and children were nosy demons, so Inko had pulled him out of conventional classes. It was, in Izuku's opinion, the single best thing she had done to help him during his recovery. When he was able to stop moping around the house, he was able to blaze through his work like never before. School had always held him back, biased teachers and slower students either intentionally giving him less attention because of his quirklessness or holding him back from working at his pace, which was typically faster than the average kid. Now that he had dedicated himself to becoming a hero, his work ethic had been restored and he was able to get more school work done than ever. He didn't want to go back if he didn't have to. Are you sure? I understand you were bullied, but you need to interact with people your age. Dr. Fujimaki told Izuku when he revealed he didn't want to go back to school. They hated me, especially Kaken. Izuku said, not happy about it. Fujimaki leaned forward. This being Katsuki Bakugu, correct? Why do you think he hates you? He asked. Izuku shook his head. I don't really want to talk about that. Izuku said. Fujimaki nodded, returning the conversation back to school. You can't just hang out with me and your mom, Izuku. How are you going to survive a hero academy if you haven't socialized in years? Their courses are hard enough by themselves. I don't want you to struggle socially too. Fujimaki said. Eventually, you're going to have to make friends. When I see that you're ready to do it again, I'll recommend it to your mother. Fujimaki continued. Wait. Izuku said, raising a hand. If I socialize outside of school, then can I stay in remote learning? He asked hopeful. I'll make a deal with you, Izuku. Dr. Fujimaki said. Izuku leaned in to hear the man better. After I deem you healthy enough to go back to proper schooling, I want you to try your best to make some friends or at least talk to some strangers. If you can manage a stable relationship with someone your age, I'll let you continue your remote learning. He said. Izuku immediately nodded. He wasn't sure he wanted to do it, but he knew he wanted to avoid going back to Kaken. They shook on it. That night, after Izuku's regular nightmares, he dreamt of 8 stars. Slide under the pipe. Kick off of the diagonal slab. Duck and roll to avoid the stray ball. Grab pole to change trajectory. Use the rope to climb over the wall. Run like hell. Repeat until exhausted. That was the training regime Izuku had been going through for the past month. He had long since moved past trying to avoid dodgeballs while running on an indoor track. Now he had to navigate an entire obstacle course while avoiding smaller, faster projectiles. The warehouse he trained in was substantially different from his first day there. When Izuku was still running on the track, the building was a lifeless, undecorated gray. It had stayed unnotable until the obstacle course arrived. Where the runner's track used to be, there were high walls, ropes, and low ceilings scattered about in a circular formation. In the center sat Gran Torino, a baseball launching machine, and a lawn chair. From it, he used the baseball machine to torment Izuku while he trained. Today, like many days, it was just Izuku and Gran Torino. Night Eye rarely showed up to personally train him, and Izuku was grateful for it. The man never inspired Izuku to do better, only put him down and stressed him out. It wasn't that Night Eye was mean to Izuku, or that he wasn't full of helpful tips and tricks. No, Night Eye was an incredible educator and mentor. Night Eye just didn't want Izuku to have one for all. At least, that was what Gran Torino told him. Izuku thought it made sense, so he went with it. Night Eye blatantly called him selfish for keeping the quirk, and maybe he was. As long as Izuku held the quirk, nobody more physically fit could use the power to fight back against the giant wave of crime sweeping the nation. Night Eye saw him for the child he was, but not the hero he would be. When the time came, Izuku wanted to show Night Eye he was wrong about him. But that time was not now, Izuku realized, as his fingers slipped while pulling himself over a wall, sending him plummeting back to the floor. Within a few seconds of not moving, Izuku was pelted with a baseball. Izuku groaned as he heard a whistle sound off from the center of the course. Needing some water, Izuku gathered the ball that were lying all over the track as fast as he could. As soon as he deposited them all back into the launching machine, he grabbed a bottle of water, took a large swig, and sat down. Next to him, Gran Torino put down a book he'd been reading. "So, have you had any more strange dreams?" he asked. Izuku shook his head as he wiped his cheeks clean of water. "No, sir. That weird dream about the 8 stars was the only one so far," Izuku replied. Gran Torino grunted. "Keep updating your dream journal then, brat. Nana and Tashinori never told me anything about dreams, but maybe you're special," he said. Izuku shrugged. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Izuku offered. Gran Torino shook his head. "Nah, probably not." Gran Torino didn't elaborate further. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. Izuku was doing his best to regain his energy after his workout, and the old man was pondering something Izuku couldn't guess. Eventually, Gran Torino broke the silence. "How many times do you think you got hit?" he asked. Izuku shrugged, unsure. He pulled off his tank top to look at any bruises forming on his torso. Poked and prodding them to check their age, he counted how many were from this session or not. Eventually, he came to a consensus. About 16, maybe 17. Izuku said. Gran Torino snorted and whacked the back of Izuku's head with a cane. "It was 25, brat. I kept count," he said. "Geez, does it matter all that much?" Izuku whined, rubbing the back of his head. 25 or 16, both were a lot of hits. It was the wrong thing to say though because it got him another whack. "Are you dense?" "No, wait, of course you are. There's a huge difference between 16 and 25 punches straight to your thick skull, kid. 9 hits are enough to knock out a fully grown man alone, and that's just the difference between how many times you thought you got hit and how much you really did." Gran Torino said. "I'm sorry. I'm trying to get better." Izuku said, disappointed. He had been satisfied with his performance today. Izuku had done better today than he had ever before, in his opinion. But even that wasn't good enough, he guessed. You need to. But if it makes you feel better, how many ball do you think got launched? Gran Torino asked. Izuku pondered this for a moment before remembering he had just picked up the pile of missed throws. Overall, I'd say maybe 50. Izuku guessed. Gran Torino smiled. You dodged about 2/3 of my shots, though I might have missed one or two. He said. Izuku gave a weak smile at this. It was a nice statistic, but he couldn't forget that he had still been hit so many times. Night Eye had been right about him in at least one way: his left side was undefended. He needed to get better at dodging. He wasn't even close to being agile enough to dodge a kick from Night Eye. Dropping his fake smile, Izuku looked out across the obstacle course. In reality, it was a very simple course. The reason it was tough was that it looped. It started and ended in the same place. Izuku was forced to do several laps before he either got hit too many times or got too tired to keep running. The course helped him with a lot of things, namely his cardio, agility, and awareness. Be it before the incident or after he lost his arm, if you put the old Izuku in this course, he wouldn't last 2 minutes. He was making good progress, but Izuku wanted more. He wanted to be able to dodge a kick from Night Eye. I want to try something else. Izuku was smiling as he went into Tokage Groceries. Fujimaki had been right. Izuku felt a lot better out in public with his prosthetic. Before, when Izuku went grocery shopping, he rushed through his list so he wouldn't get stared at. He hated the way people looked at him, as if he was helpless. That wasn't a problem anymore. His fake arm was a gift from the heavens. The arm looked real and, as Izuku wanted, was light as a feather. He could take it on and off with ease, his center of gravity being none the wiser. Even though the arm gave him a certain peace of mind, he made sure to only wear it out in public. One day, when he was a hero, he wanted to shed his prosthetic and show the world his real body, his true worth, with or without 2 arms. Ms. Utsushimi had given him that confidence, and he wanted to repay her faith with concrete action. Still, he liked having the arm. It made him feel symmetrical, and symmetrical felt good. Being in a grocery store by himself felt nice, too. His mother hadn't let him wander around without her for months in fear of him hurting himself again. But today she had decided to let him fly the nest for a few hours while she cleaned. So, she sent him off to the grocery store with a few extra dollars for himself. It was a nice gesture, he thought. It meant she trusted him again. He had almost retrieving everything on his list. Ham, some skis, and tomatoes were easy to reach, and Izuku thought he'd be home free until he reached the soap aisle. The brand of soap that his mom liked was on the highest shelf, and Izuku couldn't reach it. That normally wouldn't be a problem in a large chain supermarket. They typically had little footstools scattered about to help. But this place was locally owned, meaning he'd have to ask somebody to help him. He wasn't sure he was up for that today. He was about to settle for a different brand of soap when a little girl, his age, popped her head out from behind another aisle. Izuku glanced at her but thought nothing of it until she started waving at him. "Hey, do you need any help?" she asked. Izuku looked at her and then looked behind him, making sure she wasn't talking to someone else. "Me? I guess." Izuku replied. The girl smiled and bounced her way over to him. As she got closer, Izuku got a closer look at her. To his surprise, he realized they looked remarkably similar. Green tousled hair with big, round eyes and fair skin. They could almost be siblings if it wasn't for 2 things. Her hair and eyes were more of a swamp green, whereas Izuku's were more forest green in the light. And her teeth were as sharp as knives. Izuku immediately assumed she must have a jaw-related quirk. Perhaps it was just a minor mutation, or she could grow her teeth in size and shape. Izuku couldn't tell. He couldn't help but be reminded of a lizard he had seen in the zoo once, looking at her teeth and color scheme. She stopped next to him and put a finger up to her lips as if to silence him. "Shoo, don't tell anybody." The girl whispered. "Tell what dash?" Izuku tried to ask, but was cut off when the green girl's arm popped off of her shoulder. Izuku watched, fascinated, as the girl's severed arm floated up to the top shelf and fumbled around for the right dish soap. The Sunshine one." Izuku told her, realizing she didn't know which brand to grab. Within seconds, he was holding his dish soap and the girl had popped her arm back onto her shoulder. Izuku didn't know what to say as he bagged the cleaning product. He didn't need to, though, as the girl got right up in his face with a big smile. Pretty cool, right? She asked. Izuku nodded. It really was cool. What about the quirk L laws? Izuku asked, concerned for the girl. Public use of quirks was outlawed despite their wide prominence. Everybody thought it SCKD, but it remained an integral part of their society. The girl shrugged her shoulders. My daddy owns this place, so I can't get in trouble. If you tell him though, I might get grounded. So don't do that, please. The girl whispered. Izuku nodded. Oh, you're Mr. Tokage's kid? He asked, despite his discomfort at her proximity. He wasn't sure how much longer he was going to be able to handle this conversation, but he was intrigued. The girl nodded in affirmative. Yep. I'm Setsuna, by the way. What's your name? Setsuna asked. Izuku Midoriya. Yours? Oh crap, wait dash, Izuku humbled as Setsuna laughed. At him. His face was bright red as she continued to giggle. Soon though, she realized he looked uncomfortable and apologized. It's no problem, Tokage. Anyways, what is your quirk? It looked cool. Izuku asked, trying to redirect the conversation. Setsuna beamed at him. Oh, I can split my body up and move the pieces all around like drones. Setsuna looked around them to make sure nobody was in their aisle. Watch this. Izuku almost screamed when her head fell off her shoulders and started circling him. Giggles came from all directions as he fought back his surprise. After her head got reattached and Izuku calmed back down, he couldn't help but look at her in small amazement. Why your quirk is so cool? Are you going to be Dash? Setsuna cut him off. A hero? I haven't decided yet. People keep telling me that I could be a really good one, but I'm not sure it's what I want. She said. Izuku nodded, a little disappointed. Yeah, you could be an amazing one with a quirk like that. If you wanted to, you could totally do it. Izuku said in earnest. She really could, he thought. He couldn't think of any major heroes that were currently active that had such a unique and diverse ability. One day, when her quirk had fully matured and she mastered it, she could be a force of nature in the crime-fighting scene. She could scout disaster zones with ease by making her eyes fly ahead of her. Or, she could help people out of dangerous areas by letting them fly on her limbs. Her ability was wonderful. It was only after all these thoughts went through his head that he realized he had said them all aloud. She was staring at him with a guarded appreciation, like she was flattered, but thought he was weird. Which Izuku thought he guessed he was. I'm so sorry, sometimes all of my thoughts just spill out and dash, Izuku tried to explain, but the girl shook her head. Nah, it's fine I guess. What was your quirk, by the way? She asked. Izuku, still feeling apologetic, didn't know how to respond. He'd been asked this 1,000 times as a child, many times just to make fun of him for his quirklessness. After a while, he had learned to just ignore them, but now he didn't know how to answer. Oh well, I have super strength. He answered. It was a bit of an understatement, but it was technically true. Setsuna raised an eyebrow at him. You're kinda skinny though, she said. Izuku choked out a laugh, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. He wasn't offended. Why yeah, you got me there. A weird silence hung between them for a few seconds before Setsuna backed off of him, giving Izuku room to breathe. Well, have a nice day. If you need anything else from the top shelf, ring the bell next to the checkout. Our apartment is on the 2nd floor, and the bell is how my dad lets me know to come down for a shift. Later, Midoriya. Setsuna said, waving at Midoriya as she left. Izuku tried to wave back, but she was gone before he could. Izuku didn't leave the aisle for a few minutes as he did his best to catch his breath. That was the first time he'd talked to someone his age in months. Maybe even before the incident. It was easier, he decided, to talk to people his age now that he wasn't quirkless. Everyone at elementary school had defaulted to bullying him for it, but maybe it would be easier to make friends now that people didn't think he was broken. Without realizing it, Izuku was clutching his fake arm as he thought this. He needed to get away from people before he got overwhelmed. He got the last items on his list before checking out. Mr. Tokage was the cashier today. Sporting a thin smile and hints of gray in his temples, Mr. Tokage looked much older than he actually was. Will that be all, young man? Mr. Tokage asked. Izuku nodded, not saying a word. All right, he continued. The man glanced down at Izuku's left hand, a knowing look in his lidded eyes. From under the counter, he pulled out a small chocolate bar and tossed it to Izuku. To your recovery, Mr. Tokage said. Izuku's eyes widened. He tried to give it back, but the man refused. I've seen you come in here with your mom a bunch of times, kid. You're looking a lot better. You earned it, he said. Izuku sighed and accepted the treat. Thanks. Izuku was still thinking about the Tokages while training with Gran Torino the next day. They had been so nice to him, more than he deserved. It was hard to forget. Hey, did you hear anything I just said, brat? Gran Torino asked, annoyed. Izuku shook his head to clear any dangling thoughts of the Tokages. Sorry, sir. What was it again? Izuku asked. Gran Torino scoffed. You were the one who asked me in the first place, kid. I said that we're going to work on dodging actual attacks today, he said. Izuku blushed, remembering he asked him to do this yesterday. Hopefully his grogginess would clear up by the end of the day. All right, let's get started. What's first? Izuku asked. First, Izuku never got to hear what the man was about to say because, across the warehouse, a door slammed open. In the entrance stood Night Eye, and he looked serious. Night Eye? I didn't think you were coming today, Gran Torino called out. Izuku nodded. Night Eye had a schedule that he kept religiously, and they were not on that schedule today. Night Eye dropped a briefcase he carried next to the door and walked in, hands in pockets. He didn't even glance at Izuku. It's been 6 months to the day since All Might left us. My schedule cleared up today, and I want Midoriya. Night Eye said, his voice firm. Fine by me. We were going to start real combat training today. Gran Torino was cut off when Night Eye shook his head. No. I'm taking him out of here. He needs to see what it's like before we actually start training him. He needs to know. Night Eye said. Izuku tilted his head. See what? Where are we going? Izuku asked. Night Eye turned to him for the first time, and Izuku got a good look at him. Night Eye's eyes were covered in shades that looked remarkably similar to his normal glasses. He couldn't make out a specific expression because of them, but he noticed that Night Eye's eyes were red and puffy. I'm going to take you out on a patrol. You'll be perfectly safe with me, Night Eye said. Gran Torino spoke up. That's a bad idea. You know how rough crime has been. We don't need to expose him to that crap, he said. Night Eye didn't appear to care. What about combat training? Izuku asked. Night Eye shrugged. Later. Come on now, I don't have all day, Night Eye said. Izuku looked at Gran Torino. Was shaking his head at him. He wasn't sure what Night Eye wanted, but whatever it was important. All right, he agreed. Gran Torino sighed while Night Eye nodded in approval. Let's go, Night Eye said. Night Eye didn't play the radio as he drove. He found it distracting. So many songs with different tempos and meanings, if he wasn't careful, he might crash while he got too invested in a song. Or worse, he might miss a crime that he could have stopped otherwise. He guessed he and the brat agreed on that at the very least. Izuku didn't like to listen to music in the car either. As a city kid, he seemed content to just enjoy the novelty of a car. So, the kid asked, why are we doing this? A couple of reasons, he replied. When Izuku didn't ask what, Night Eye continued. Do you know how bad crime has gotten since All Might's death? He asked. Izuku shifted in his seat. It's gotten worse. Without the symbol of peace, I know violent crime has gone up. Izuku said. Night Eye nodded. An understatement. It's quintupled. Even though there are more heroes than ever, we're struggling just as much as we were in the dark times before All Might. Night Eye said. Izuku didn't say anything. We need a special hero to step up, and soon. Endeavor is incredible, but he isn't what we need. We need the true ninth. Night Eye continued, glancing at Izuku as he said this. The boy wasn't worthy of one for all, and even if he was, Japan needed someone who could step up to the plate today, not 10 years from now. He had nothing against the kid, but he didn't have the right mindset or the age. Off in the distance, Night Eye saw a minor villain battle taking place. He wasn't concerned. The fight was being controlled by several heroes careful to keep the fighting contained. Night Eye had driven here knowing that. He had checked the hero network before picking up Izuku. The kid said nothing as Night Eye parked a few blocks away from the villain fight. The fight had split, with some of the villains fighting in the streets whereas the others were fighting outside a grocery store. After watching the heroes battle in silence for a few minutes, Izuku finally spoke up. His voice was quiet and cold, something Night Eye hadn't heard from the boy since they had first met. "Is this why you brought me here? To push me into giving up one for all?" Izuku asked. Night Eye nodded. "I need you to understand. It's been 6 months, Izuku, and crime is already this bad. What will happen in a year? What about 5? Who will step up? Japan needs somebody to make them smile again, someone who can beat back villains without any issue. We need a real hero." Night Eye replied. Izuku didn't say anything, his eyebrows furrowed. "I've found a young man, a fresh UA graduate, who I can trust to give the quirk to. Thunderstrike. You may have heard of him." He continued. Thunderstrike was a man with a heart of gold and a useful quirk to boot. Depending on what material he touched, he could create sonic blasts at different intensities. When just touching the air, he could generate blasts strong enough to feel like a punch to the gut. While touching steel, he could create a force strong enough to uproot a tree and blow over cars. Night Eye had scouted the man for his agency almost immediately after founding it, and the man had just recently officially signed onto his team permanently. He wasn't perfect, but he was the ideal candidate. His record was littered with minor infractions of UA policy, but those had all been over minor things. Fights, pranks, and other such things that Night Eye could care less about. Off in the distance, the fight on the roof of the supermarket was intensifying. Izuku continued his silence, igniting Night Eye's nerves. What gives you the right to hold his quirk hostage? What makes you want to keep his quirk all to yourself so bad? Please, Midoriya. Why? Night Eye begged, his voice cracking. The car was silent for a few seconds while they both realized what he said. Night Eye tugged a bit on his collar, flustered that he lost his cool. Izuku continued his stoic stare at his feet. Do you miss him? The boy mumbled, not looking up. Any rage that lingered in Night Eye froze at the question. His chest tightened a bit. Of course I miss him. He was my best friend and my mentor. I looked up to him. Night Eye said. If you really looked up to him, how did it make you feel when he put his faith in you? Izuku continued. Night Eye leaned back in his chair, threading his fingers together in thought. He remembered back to the early days when Night Eye had convinced All Might to let him be his sidekick. At first, the man only used him for his future sight. He never let him run into battle with him and never made him pick up his slack. He didn't want to put his burden on Night Eye whatsoever. After a few years of this, eventually they were pulled into a large-scale operation. It was to take down a huge crime boss in northern Japan who had dozens of dangerous employees. This was the first time Night Eye was truly called into action as a combatant, and he would never forget what All Might said to him the night before it all went down. I believe in you. That's what he said to me. It was simple, but I've never forgotten it. Night Eye said. This made Izuku look up. Night Eye felt a twinge of regret in his chest when he realized the boy was tearing up. He said the same thing to me too. Be the ninth wielder. I believe in you. Izuku said, sniffling. He told me I could do it even though I had just gotten him killed. I hear it every single night. Night Eye didn't know what to say. Midoriya had never shared what went on between them that day. He didn't interrupt as Izuku continued. He died so I could live. I want to honor him, but I'm tired of being selfish. If you really think that I'm not cut out to be the ninth, then dash. He never got to finish, because their attention was ripped from their conversation as his car raised into the air. Night Eye peeked out the window to see what was going on and realized a second too late that a villain had picked up the whole vehicle. Night Eye's seatbelt choked him as his car was thrown like a frisbee, sending all his possessions flying throughout the car as they flew. Sheet, Night Eye thought. He had stopped paying attention to the fight. He ripped his seatbelt off of himself and Izuku, grabbing the surprised boy and leaping out of the flung car. Covering Izuku's head with his hands, Night Eye landed back first against the concrete wall of an apartment complex. Cracks spread out from behind him as rubble and dust rained on him from above. He coughed, tasting copper in his mouth. Dazed, he could only vaguely make out the sight of his destroyed car blocks down the road. One broke formation to come over to him and check his vitals, but Night Eye shooed him away, already recovering. He felt his face and cursed. His glasses were gone, and he hadn't brought a second pair. He checked Midoriya, he was unscathed, but his prosthetic had gotten lost midair. As he stood up, he felt his mind sharpening into battle mode. The current conflict, when he had arrived, had been contained by a handful of heroes in a 3-block radius. Now though, whenever Night Eye's attention had drifted from the battle, things had changed. He had thought the villains were petty thieves, but it appeared they must have been a part of some local gang. Their buddies must have all come in to help fight off the heroes, which drastically changed the tides of the fight. The villains went from maybe 5 to over 15. Some of them were animal mutants, whereas a handful were just using plain old guns. He picked out his phone and sent a message through the hero network for backup. He looked over to the hero who had come to make sure he was okay. He didn't recognize him, but he looked like he'd just got out of school. That was good, he was fresh on the protocol. The backup must already be on the way. Night Eye looked at Izuku. Get this kid out of the danger zone. Don't let him out of your sight until you're in the clear. He ordered. The young hero nodded, not questioning the order. Heroes didn't usually take orders from others, but Night Eye was known in every corner of the country, so the kid probably felt he couldn't refuse. It didn't matter to Night Eye, so long as Midoriya was out of the danger zone. He scanned the fight from one end to the other to decide his plan of action. Most of the fighting was being done on his left, toward the supermarket. Night Eye wasn't concerned about that. The fighting near there was even. What he was concerned about was the very thin line of heroes keeping the other gangsters from joining their friends. If that group was to fall, this might turn into a problem for the main force. His eyes settled onto the villain who had destroyed his car. He pulled out his hyperdensity seals, thumbing their cold surface as his eyes flashed an amethyst purple. Izuku's head felt hollow as he was carried by the hero escorting him. He was hyperventilating. Nausea permeated his entire body as if he had been riding a roller coaster for 2 hours straight. It wasn't the sudden movement from being saved from the car, nor was it the emotional stress of almost giving up one for all. It was the battle itself. At this moment, all Izuku could think about was when he made the biggest mistake of his life. Images from the battle he had long since thought he blocked out made their way into his skull, giving him a splitting headache. A man in a pristine black tux, his arms spread out as thousands of mechanical tentacles erupted from his back. The same man flying high into the sky, only to come back down with muscles the size of his apartment complex. The man's fist, now normal-sized, inches from his face. The only thing stopping Izuku from being blown away being a human meat shield, All Might. He cast his gaze out to the battle around them. 8 villains and 5 heroes were battling near him. Why was he here? Where was he? Did he wander into another battle? Was another hero going to give up their life for him? He almost retched at the thought. Hey, no throwing up. I'll get you out of here, little guy. Don't worry. The hero carrying him said. Izuku's head was pounding, but he took a second to look at who was carrying him. His suit was a bright yellow and white mix, with a large W centered on his chest. He knew this hero. Livewire. He had a simple electricity quirk. His eyes dragged themselves toward the main fight. It was outside of a grocery store that he was intimately familiar with. Oh God, Izuku thought. Were the Tokage still in there? He swallowed. Were you able to evacuate? Izuku choked out. The hero looked grim. We cleared the streets, but any residence dash he never got to finish, because he was blindsided by another flung car. Livewire was sent flying, crashing into the back of an alleyway near them while Izuku was sent tumbling down to the concrete. Despite his nausea and all the scrapes littering his body, Izuku was able to drag himself behind a building to avoid any more flying cars. He breathed in as hard as he could, holding it until it hurt before releasing it. Dr. Fujimaki had told him that the most important thing to do when panicking was to breathe, so he focused on that. Once his head was spinning less, Izuku took stock of his body. His prosthetic was gone, lost somewhere between here and where they had parked. That was fine, it couldn't help him anyway. He felt around his limbs, none of them were broken. He was bleeding in 4 places, none of them his head. He was okay. When he realized he was okay, his memories of the situation began to return to him. No, he hadn't wandered into the battle. Night Eye had tried taking him into a controlled environment to convince him he needed to give up one for all. He locked away those thoughts, they weren't going to help him. Where was Livewire? He peeked down the alleyway he crawled into. Away from the road and in a pile of garbage bags, Livewire was sprawled out in unconsciousness. Izuku stumbled over to the hero to check his pulse. It was still beating. Izuku wasn't a medical expert, nor did he have a good understanding of the human body, but he knew that Livewire's arm was broken. Arms weren't meant to bend that way. He did his best to push it into the correct position before trying to pull him out of the side from the road. He didn't want any villains to see the unconscious hero and try and beat on him while he's down. He grabbed at the hero's skin-tight suit, but he didn't quite have the grip strength to haul him to where he wanted. He settled on using the garbage bags as leverage while he rolled the unconscious man out of sight. Izuku made a mental note to work on his grip strength. He needed it to be twice as strong as a normal person's. With Livewire now safe, Izuku remembered the main issue at hand. The streets were a war zone, and while there weren't any pedestrians in danger, anyone who lived in the area was threatened. His stomach dropped as he remembered that he was almost 20 meters from Tokage Groceries. Izuku glanced at the villain fight. It was still going strong, but the fight was gradually being dragged towards the store. Izuku couldn't fight anybody. Not just because he didn't have a license, but because he was weak. If he went back into that chaos, his panic attack would resurface and he'd probably be killed. He had never wanted to be strong as he did right now. If he could use all of one for all, or even a little bit, he'd be able to clean up all these gangsters in a matter of seconds. Nobody could get hurt again. Livewire wouldn't have a broken arm and probably a concussion. Night Eye's car wouldn't be a burning pile of destroyed steel. If only he was strong. Izuku slapped his cheeks, he was just a kid. He didn't have to do anything, he couldn't do anything. If a hero didn't step up soon, the battle was going to be taken inside of the store. From across the street, Izuku could see cracks begin to form on the building's load-bearing walls. The building was being weathered rapidly by the onslaught of attacks from the villains. Whenever an attack from the villains missed a hero, the building was the one that took the damage. It was a no-brainer for the heroes, they'd rather the building tank the big hits than get hurt themselves. What they didn't know, however, was that an entire family lived in that building. An entire family that showed nothing but kindness to Izuku. Before Izuku even knew what he was doing, he was sprinting across the street. He didn't know when he started running, all he knew was that he was. Izuku could hear his heart in his ears as he stumbled past an unconscious villain sprawled out in the street. The man didn't look much like a villain, but he was swathed in yellow clothes. All the villains were coordinated in yellow colors, he noticed. They all must be gangsters, Izuku decided. Behind him, the hero who defeated the unconscious gangster called out for him to get to safety. Izuku ignored him. He weaved between Fish Mutant and a gun-toting gangster alike as they focused on their own fights. Izuku didn't have to worry about the villains, he realized. They were already preoccupied with the heroes. Realizing this, he could ignore the chaos of the streets and focus on the building ahead of him. It was a 2-story brick structure with a cozy balcony above the entrance. Izuku pressed himself up against the window to try and see inside, to make sure there were no customers trapped in the building. He tried to yank and pull on the front door, but it was sealed shut. Mr. Tokage must have locked all the doors and windows when he realized a brawl was breaking out in the street. Izuku couldn't find another way in. Izuku couldn't find a fire escape and the doors were locked. He looked between the glass doors and the pieces of stone breaking off of the building. The battle was tearing the store apart. Izuku sighed. Sorry, Mr. Tokage, Izuku thought. He grabbed at the crumbled concrete, picking a stone the size of Izuku's fist, and chucked it through the front door. Izuku's innocent mind immediately recoiled at his brash action. He just vandalized a man's property, and without good reason. For a second, Izuku thought he might go to jail. He crushed that thought when he remembered why he was doing this. Nobody except him knew the Tokages lived upstairs. The heroes would let the villains destroy the grocery store if it meant saving their own skins. As he stepped over the shards of broken glass, he could feel the way the building ummed and groaned, as if the store itself could feel the scattered blows across its surface. A bullet whizzed past Izuku's ear, scaring him to the floor. He tucked into the fetal position under the cover of a shelf, praying he hadn't been shot at intentionally. When no more shots went off near him, he allowed himself to relax. Izuku's ears rang. He only got back up when he could hear again. It took him a few moments to process what just happened. A bullet had missed him by not even 6 inches. He almost died. Much like his shame at almost giving up one for all, Izuku packed down his shock and fear into a tight ball deep in his gut. Hopefully, he'd never have to unpack those feelings again. Izuku still flinched when he heard gunshots go off down the street. He made his way over to the register, careful not to be in the sightlines of a hero or a villain as he did so. Izuku didn't want to bring more attention to Tokage groceries than there already was, nor did he want to distract a hero from their battle. Izuku fumbled around in the checkout line for a moment, recalling what Setsuna had told him not 2 days ago. If you need anything else from the top shelf, ring the bell next to the checkout. Izuku muttered under his breath. Not having looked for it yesterday, Izuku struggled to find where the supposed bell was. After fumbling around for it for about a minute, Izuku's fingers snagged on something. In his hands, he held a rope with a tiny little bell on the bottom. His eyes trailed up and down the rope, fascinated. It wasn't just a simple bell on a string, but a pulley system. There was a hole cut in the ceiling of the first floor, just big enough for a bell to fit through. When Izuku pulled the rope down, there was a second rope that went up to the second floor. It was like a vertical conveyor belt. He pulled the rope all the way around so that the bell attached to the rope was sitting on the second floor. He gave it a little jingle. Above him, he heard several footsteps all at once. A heavy set of footsteps, presumably Mr. Tokage, and then 2 much lighter steps, his wife and daughter. Izuku peered up through the hole in the ceiling. He couldn't make out anything specific, but he was sure that someone was standing right above him. "Who's down there?" A low, masculine voice said. It was feeble but threatening. Whoever was speaking was afraid, and Izuku knew exactly who it was. "It's me, Mr. Tokage. Midoriya," Izuku said. A small, girlish squeal sounded out from above him, but Izuku couldn't tell if it was Setsuna or her mother. Mr. Tokage didn't say anything as Izuku heard shuffling from upstairs. Izuku, still peering up the hole as best he could, almost jumped back in surprise when a thin eye began to peer back. "Midoriya, the hell were you doing here?" Mr. Tokage asked. His eye disappeared for a second as he looked away. "Setsuna," he hissed, "open the hatch." Within moments, Izuku was on the second floor. He watched as Mr. Tokage slammed the latch shut and pushed a heavy piece of furniture over top of it. "I'll ask again. Midoriya, what are you doing here?" Mr. Tokage repeated. "I got caught up outside, sir. Do you know what's going on?" Izuku replied. Mr. Tokage shook his head. "Not a thing. I heard a gunshot and just shut everything down and locked up for the day." "Did you see what's happening?" he asked. Izuku nodded. "There's a whole gang attack going on out in the streets. I didn't even know there were gangs around here. Anyways, the fighting is getting worse, and they're right outside. Haven't you felt all the shaking? Heard all the gunshots?" Izuku asked. From his right, Setsuna spoke up. "Yeah. What's going on? How'd you get in the store?" she asked. Behind her, Ms. Tokage nodded. "Are you okay?" Setsuna's mother asked. Izuku nodded at her appreciatively before replying to Setsuna. "The fighting is being dragged close to the building by the heroes. I don't think they know you're in here." Izuku said. "Oh, and kind of broke in." Sorry," Izuku said. Mr. Tokage tried to speak up, but Izuku shook his head at him. No. Whatever it is, that's not important. We need to get you guys out of here before they break and dash," Izuku tried to say, but was cut off by a gunshot. He tackled Setsuna and her mother to the floor and behind a dresser as another gunshot went off, shattering 2 windows in the upstairs room. He glanced at the father, He had taken cover himself and was fine. Doing his best to cover their bodies with his own, he got awkwardly close to Setsuna. She stared at him, gobsmacked, before her gaze naturally drifted to where Izuku's stub was digging into her side. Because of the bullets making Izuku's ears ring, he couldn't hear what she said to him, but he could read her lips. "Your arm," seemed to be the thing she was confused about. Izuku ignored her for the moment. Izuku rolled off of the two girls, shuffling over to a position where he could see the balcony window, the one that had shattered first. Nothing happened for a moment, and Izuku thought the volley of bullets might have ended. For a second, Izuku considered getting back up. That idea went straight out the window as he saw a hand grab onto the balcony. Izuku pulled back into the cover of the dresser as the same hand hauled an entire body onto the second floor. Izuku didn't have a perfect angle, but he could tell who it was. Yellow shoes and socks, with the bottoms of their shorts being yellow as well? This was one of the gangsters. Izuku shifted over for a better angle. The man held a small pistol and had no visible mutation. His arms were bare, no Yakuza tattoos in sight. This was a small-time gangster. Izuku thought that might have made him less nervous, but it didn't. It was the man who was unconscious on the road. Or, Izuku guessed, the man who had been pretending to be. Izuku tried to stay hidden, praying that the gangster wouldn't see them and decide to leave, but he wasn't so lucky. Mr. Tokage stood up, hands in the air. "What are you doing in my house?" he asked. The gangster took a step back in surprise, probably not having expected a confrontation. He slid down the bandana covering his mouth to speak. Izuku tried to memorize what the man looked like, but with him still wearing glasses and a hat, he couldn't see anything memorable. Are you doing up, you old man? Sit back down." The man called out. Mr. Tokage didn't budge. I asked, "What are you doing in my house?" He yelled again. The man pointed his pistol at Mr. Tokage. He felt Setsuna move beside him. He put his arm on her to get her to stop moving. The gangsters still hadn't spotted them. Primal fear gripped Izuku's heart. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he wanted to stay hidden, or at least not let the Tokage women be seen. As the gangster raised his pistol towards Mr. Tokage more threateningly, something odd happened. Where Izuku's stub was, he began to feel hot. It wasn't unlike phantom itches or pains, but it wasn't similar either. For a brief moment, it reminded Izuku of how it felt when he used One for All for the first time. "I need hostages, so get the F down, old man." The man yelled, shooting a warning shot directly into the floor. Behind Izuku, Ms. Tokage squealed in fright. When the gangster looked at them, Izuku could feel a switch being flicked on in his body. In a flash, the burning sensation in his nubs spread through him. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he knew one thing. The only thing he wanted was to not be seen. In a moment of pure chaos and confusion, Izuku's pores opened and smoke exploded out of him. It burst out of him like a tiger being freed from its cage. Izuku and everybody else in the room screamed as the smoke expanded out of him and covered the whole room. The man with the gun gagged, surprised, and shot blindly into the now completely gray-white room. Izuku felt pain flare up in his leg, but he paid it no mind. Despite his utter confusion at the situation, Izuku didn't give up a second. He jumped up off the floor and onto the dresser before springing off the furniture towards where the gangster had been standing a moment ago. Arms spread wide, Izuku collided with the gun-wielding man and brought him down. He was much weaker and weighed nothing compared to the man, but Izuku didn't need to overpower him. Still emitting smoke like a hearth full of pine, Izuku's skin was blowing out gas like an air hockey table. It made him slippery. He could shimmy out of any hold the man tried to put him in, before finally kicking the man's wrist and forcing him to let go of the gun. Izuku couldn't see anything in the room on the count of the smoke, but he heard someone grab the gun, assumedly Mr. Tokage. Distracted, Izuku was flung off of the larger body into the wall beside him. He still couldn't see anything, but he heard the gangster, now gunless and presumably without a quirk, get up hastily and scurry on out towards where he broke the balcony window. "Get the hell out of here." He heard a feminine voice scream, "Setsuna," he mentally noted, before the sound of the pistol going off rang. The blind shot hit nothing but wood, but Izuku heard the gangster scream in fear as he jumped off the second-floor balcony. Recovered from being thrown into the wall, Izuku called out to the Tokiges. "Where are you guys?" "I can't see," Izuku shouted. Two coughs from the other side of the smoky room confirmed their location, and the sound of a gun being dropped told him where Setsuna was. Izuku felt sweat roll down his back as his body, still heated up uncomfortably, began to ache. He stifled a coughing fit before running into the excess smoke and grabbing at where the Tokiges were, doing his best to guide them out into the sunlit balcony where the smoke was less thick. "Turn off your quirk, Midoriya. I can barely breathe in here," Mr. Tokage called during a coughing fit. More sweat began to roll down his face as he tried his best to turn off whatever was going on in his body, but he couldn't do it. "I can't. I don't know what this is. Setsuna, can you check the alleyway next to us with your quirk? If it's safe to run down there, we can get out of here and out of this smoke," Izuku said, coughing himself. Despite the access to the open air, even the balcony was beginning to become too covered in smoke to breathe properly. He couldn't see her nod, but he knew she agreed when her head flew past him. Izuku continued to try and smother whatever fire beneath his skin that was causing the smoke, but no matter what he tried he couldn't get it too slow. Thankfully, Setsuna's head returned within the minute. "The garbage alley is clear," Setsuna called out to them. Izuku didn't have time to say thanks, because as soon as Setsuna's head was back on her shoulders, she was already jumping off the balcony. Izuku watched as, one by one, the Tokiges cleanly slid off the balcony with practiced ease. Despite it being a 10-foot drop, they didn't even seem to mind. For a brief, odd moment, all Izuku could think about was fire safety. Eventually, he joined them in the alley. The fighting seemed to have died down, with the only fight still actually going on being between Night Eye, several rookie heroes, and one beefy and mutated villain who had been throwing cars like frisbees. The aches that had begun flashing through Izuku's body had evolved into pulses of agony, forcing him to take a break every few steps. At one point when he stopped entirely, he felt a soft hand grab at his own and pull him to his feet. A splitting migraine stopped him from being able to see who it was, but he thought it might have been Setsuna. By the time they got to the other side of the street the ally was on, Izuku couldn't move anymore. His skin just wouldn't stop smoking. Eventually, he stumbled to the floor, letting go of the hand that had been pulling him. "Midoriya!" He heard someone call off in the distance. He couldn't bring himself to check who had done so. His ears felt like they were ringing just as, if not harder than when he was almost shot in the skull. All sensation slowly fell away as he laid on what he thought might have been concrete. No noise, no sight, no smell. When Izuku finally lost consciousness, he saw the 8 stars, one shining brighter than all the others. Izuku woke up in an odd place. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe he'd be in a hospital, or maybe in his own bed. But no, he was sitting right at the seat of an empty throne of some medieval European castle. He begrudgingly got up and shuffled out toward a window. Once again, his expectations were averted when instead of seeing a traditional European landscape with forests and plains, he saw a black void. He stumbled back, surprised. He looked up and realized that the castle didn't have a roof, as if the ceiling had been torn off by some ultra-powerful siege weapon. Behind him, he heard a feminine snicker. He swiveled around, only to be greeted with a sight even stranger than the destroyed castle or the void itself. A large round table with 8 grandiose chairs circling it, all of them full of people who looked nothing alike. All of them except for one, that is. The chair closest to Izuku was empty. He tried to call out to them, only to realize a moment later that he didn't have a mouth, or a nose, ears, legs, or a torso. Izuku's body was made up of wispy smoke that circled around him like a humanoid tornado. For a moment, Izuku thought whatever power he had awoken in the Tokage's apartment had fully transformed him into a smoke monster. He still had eyes, though, and a left arm. Surprised, he tried to flex it and feel the lost limb, but he didn't have any sensation. As he tried flailing his arm to try and get his blood flowing, he heard the same female snicker. He turned back to the people he didn't recognize and saw that a brunette woman with a strong build was giggling at him. When she noticed that he saw her, she waved. You're here early, the woman said, smiling wide. A handful of the other people around him also gave a wave but didn't say anything. He wanted to ask so many questions. Where was he? Who was she? Why was he here? And so much more, but without a mouth or lungs, he couldn't. The woman must have understood he was frustrated through his eyes, as she got up from her chair and walked over to him. She put a hand on his non-existent shoulder, simultaneously motioning one of her companions to join them. Hey kiddo. I know you're confused right now, but rest assured. When you wake up, you'll be back with Sorahiko and your mom. And, can you come over and explain what happened before he wakes up, please? The woman asked. The man, walked over. He was somewhat short for a fully grown man and wore a high-collar jacket that covered everything below his eyes. He had short black hair messily parted away from his snake-like eyes. I'm 6. And introduced. Izuku suddenly remembered how the woman had greeted him. She had called him the 9th. Was she talking about one for all? Sorry about the scare earlier. Quirk exhaustion as I know. What you did back there and gestured to the void, was tap into my quirk, smokescreen. And said. Izuku didn't know what to do or say. He stared at N for a few seconds before trying something. He dropped to his knees and cleared the ground of dust and rubble. With his fingernails, he cut into his palm. He was glad to learn he could bleed in this place, even if he couldn't feel anything. He smeared one word into the floor between himself and N with his blood. N knelt down beside him to read what he wrote. The man tilted his head back up to look at Izuku before he began speaking. Because of the angle of his collar, Izuku could see the man's full face and was somewhat disappointed to see that the collar wasn't hiding a cool scar. Good question, 9. This has never happened before. You're the first who's ever been able to do this. You're also the youngest person to hold the quirk by far, so that might also affect it. Instead, Izuku cut into his hand a little deeper for more blood. It didn't hurt because of the lack of sensation, but it was odd seeing himself bleed but not feel it. Ofa? Holder? Yeah kiddo. We're inside one for all right now. Don't ask me how it works, because I don't have a clue. Maybe ask one the next time you're here. Anyways. And said, glancing at a watch on his wrist. Izuku wasn't sure a watch could work inside a quirk, but he wasn't about to question it. Izuku began to feel dizzy. We're running out of time, and we have no idea when you'll see us again, so try to remember 3 things. You need to start training our quirk immediately, don't use my quirk so much that you can't see, and all for one, our progenitor is still alive. And said, his voice slowly fading into the distance. Izuku tried to reach out to the others as he was SCD away from the throne room and into the void. The last thing Izuku saw before succumbing to the void's call was a single blonde man hiding behind the empty chair Izuku saw earlier. The first thing Izuku noticed when he woke up was a searing pain in his right leg, midway through the thigh. Izuku groaned as he sat up, the pain in his leg flaring up as he did so. Somebody grabbed his arm as he tried to roll out of bed. Hey, it's bed rest for you only. A woman said. Izuku blinked at who was holding his arm. It was a nurse, he realized. He was in the hospital. What happened? Izuku asked, his throat dry. The nurse smiled as he settled himself back into place, no longer trying to escape. Do you want your mother here? We can talk about it with her if you want. She's just down the hall getting food. The nurse said. Izuku shook his head. He was confused and wanted to know why he was in the hospital and what happened now. The nurse sighed. You're in here for 2 reasons. Your leg. The woman gave his leg an angelic touch, so much so that it didn't hurt, and for severe quirk exhaustion. For this, the nurse just gestured toward him in his entirety. Oh. Izuku said. It all came back to him in a moment, the dream, the smoke, the tokiges, and Ogo to Washington. I don't know the details of your injury, but I know you were shot in the thigh. How does your leg feel? The nurse asked. Hurts. Can you go get my mom? Izuku asked. The nurse nodded and went to fetch his mother. He used the time to comb through his memories for when he got shot. He doesn't think it was after they escaped the apartment, and he knew it wasn't before he broke into the store, so. Oh yeah, Izuku remembered. Adrenaline had kept him going, but now he distinctly remembers his leg getting shot after his skin exploded into smoke. Izuku stirred in his thoughts for a few minutes as the nurse was away, thinking about all the things he didn't want to. Lucky for him, the nurse and his mom returned after a short time. "Excuse me, I'll be back in a few minutes, but I'll let you have some alone time," the nurse said. Before she left, she gave Izuku another dose of painkillers for his leg and scampered on out. Inko looked at him with wide eyes brimming with tears. Her eyes were filled with love, anxiety, and a small amount of pride. "My baby boy," she whispered. Izuku felt tears well up in his eyes. "Mom." They cried together. Night Eye decided it was awkward. A week had gone by since Midoriya had woken up, and now they were in a car together again. The last time they were here, Night Eye had been wound up so tight he had actually dared scream at the boy. He had demanded to know why this boy, a child, was being so selfish. Night Eye had been the selfish one that day, he realized. He had been so stressed out that he began to think that the only way to solve all the world's problems was to give some rookie, who he barely knew, the greatest power in the world. He had dared to think that Izuku Midoriya wasn't worthy of one for all. He wasn't one to admit when he made a mistake out loud, but he would certainly internalize it. It was his greatest fault. But this was a special occasion. "Midoriya, I'm sorry for the things I put you through last week. It was rash, foolish, and out of line. Please do not forgive me," Night Eye said in all seriousness. Izuku was worthy. He proved himself after he saved that family. Night Eye didn't have to be there to know. That little family of 3 Izuku saved had spoken so highly of him when the ambulances arrived that Night Eye had been shell-shocked. His world had practically collapsed in on itself once the dust had settled. He'd brought a little boy, not more than a child, into live combat to prove a point. Not only that, but he'd been so negligent that Izuku had been able to sneak into the fighting to help. That shame by itself was nearly enough to push him over the edge, but Izuku had gone beyond all expectations. Any doubt he had for the boy's worthiness was snuffed out when he learned Izuku had used a previous user's quirk. If the quirk itself accepted him, then it seemed the only one in the equation with objections was him. "You know, when we were in here last time, I almost gave up the quirk," Izuku said. Night Eye nodded, he remembered. To crack under all those emotions. He doesn't blame Izuku a single bit. "It's fine. We have bigger issues anyway," Izuku continued, still facing forward. Night Eye's gaze darkened. Yes. Among Izuku's marvelous display of an old user's quirk, he had also relayed information that made Night Eye's blood run cold. "Just one for all's nemesis, all for one," Night Eye muttered. Izuku nodded and began to whistle a simple tune. Night Eye turned to him, taking his eyes off the road for a moment. "Whistling? When you're in mortal danger. All for one being alive without All Might is practically a doomsday scenario," Night Eye asked, concerned. Izuku shook his head, an alien calmness over the boy the likes of which Night Eye had never seen before. "Unlike you, I saw what All Might did to that poor man. He'll be on life support for the rest of his life," Izuku said. "If he ever starts to make moves again, it'll be after I've had time to catch up," he said. A guilty sort of pride wormed its way into Night Eye's heart. He'd done nothing but put the boy down since Sorahiko had insisted on him training him. In all honesty, he'd only hindered the boy up until this point. Still, he felt proud. Perhaps, logically, one for all should go to Thunderstrike, or someone else ready to take the world by storm. Maybe, logically, Izuku was the single worst choice Night Eye could have thought of 2 weeks ago. The thing is, he realized, things like logic didn't apply to people like Izuku. He remembered being young and dumb, forcing himself into All Might's inner circle just because he adored the man. He spent months chipping away at All Might's resolve, using every manipulative technique he could think of to convince the man he was vital to his heroism. Still, after months, All Might had never broken. He didn't want to risk someone's life just to make his easier. Night Eye lobbied to be his sidekick day and night, yet All Might held strong against it. They'd been the most frustrating months of his life. But one day, the man, not All Might, Toshinori, sat him down. He told him the truth of his lifelong struggle with All for One, of his dream of a world where everyone smiles, and of the crippling loneliness that comes with being the best. He told him of the present, how his life was, the fear that gripped him, and the stress of the job. He told him of the past, of wanting nothing more than to help people, only to be outcast because of his disability. But when Night Eye asked about his future, Toshinori had smiled. "I've been thinking, young Sasaki, about that. Truth be told, I'm scared. I've dedicated my life to my base instinct, service. I'm hot-blooded and rarely think about the consequences of my decisions. I help people because I must, not because I desire it. I guess you could call me a train, set to only move in one direction as fast as possible. When you look out my window, it's all blurry, but I've recently begun to think of that far-off world of tomorrow." Toshinori said, only pausing to sip his tea. Mirai Sasaki had gulped. "I'm not so arrogant to think that I'll live forever. All for One grows stronger every day. I might not have to worry about old age with him around. But I'll need a successor. Someone fundamentally like me, but preferably smarter. It'd be nice if they were smart. I've laid the groundwork, a society where children and adults can smile all the time, but I have no idea how tall this castle will be when it's all over. I'll need someone by my side who can look to the future, someone who can make the tough calls today so the world tomorrow will be easier. I need someone to balance me, someone who can invest in the future." Sir Night Eye glanced at Izuku as the boy fiddled with the archaic window swivel, a tranquility to his expression that betrayed the gravity of his position. He glanced at the boy's stub. He's not ideal, logically. He's crippled and tiny and ignorant. Every day that passes without the symbol of peace is a day an innocent man gets hurt. But people still smile, even if life is hard. They remember the good times and will weather the bad until they return. They make hard choices for better futures. The boy was broken, but he would heal given time. Night Eye checked his watch reflexively. It was an early line of All Might merchandise, something only a superfan could have gotten his hands on during the Silver Age. Toshinori's beaming smile stared back at him from behind the clock's hands. To invest in the future, to nurture and better it. For a better tomorrow. To do what All Might never would or could, now. I guess I'll have to actually start teaching you, huh? Izuku fidgeted outside the door to the Tokage shop. It was Sunday, 2 weeks after the villain attack that had left the building in shambles. The store was closed for that day, but that didn't bother the Midoriyas. They were there for more personal reasons. He glanced down at his left side. Izuku had left his new prosthetic at home, wanting to feel as authentic as possible. His green button-up was standard except for his left sleeve, which was cut short and sewn at the end. It made it less of a short sleeve and more of a pocket for his arm. Inko was also in a button-up but was sporting a purple pencil skirt. They had decided on business casual. She glanced at Izuku. "Are you sure you want to do this? We'll be stuck with them for a few hours. I know you might get uncomfortable." Inko asked. Izuku shook his head at her worries. "Were there guests, ma? If I need a break, it's not like they'll hold me hostage." Izuku replied. With that, Izuku gave a firm knock on the shop window he hadn't shattered 2 weeks ago. He still flushed whenever he thought of it. Across the inside of the store, Izuku saw Mrs. Tokage hop down the emergency ladder. Walking over to the front door, she greeted them with a smile. "Hiya, Midoriya. Ms. Midoriya too, of course. You two look so lovely today. You didn't have to go all out for us. This is a gift," Mrs. Tokage said, bowing and shaking their hands. Inko shook her concerns away. No, you can't say that and come down to greet us in such a pretty little dress," Inko said. Mrs. Tokage laughed and invited them in. Izuku looked around, a little mesmerized. The shop was almost back to 100%. While there were still the occasional bullet hole and broken window, the interior had been cleaned up. Izuku could barely recognize the place. It had been remodeled to the point that he couldn't even remember how he fumbled around after he broke in. The Tokages might not have realized it, but that took a weight off his shoulders. He had come here expecting to block out most of the setting. Without obvious reminders of being shot at, his mind was at peace. Izuku was happy to take in the coziness of the shop without worrying about dodging bullets. As they walked through, he took a peek at the ladder. Hey, Mrs. Tokage, what about your stairs? Do you guys just not use them? I didn't use them because I didn't go into your back room, but I assume you have some. Izuku asked. Mrs. Tokage shrugged. They're old and we don't use them too much. All our quirks make it so that climbing ladders is easier. I'm ambidextrous and my joints never swell up or feel pain. My husband has minor telekinesis, which he uses to reinforce his body. Setsuna can fly, obviously, she said. Izuku's eyes widened. He was about to ask about Setsuna being able to fly, but his mom spoke up first. Oh, minor telekinesis? I've got something similar. Izuku, well, he's all over the place as you saw, hee. Inko said. Izuku cringed a little but nodded. They all climbed the ladder, with Izuku helping his mother to her feet at the top. Surrounding them were the Tokages as they patiently waited for them to stand up and adjust themselves accordingly. When Inko was done making sure her skirt wasn't off-center, the two parties made a proper greeting. About a week ago, after Nitai's apology, the Tokages had invited them for a small dinner. This surprised him, as Izuku hadn't exactly done what he set out to do. He hadn't heroically escorted them out into the alleyway away from the danger. In reality, they had dragged Izuku down the alley whilst he was bleeding out. They had insisted, however, that he was a hero. He hadn't felt like one until they pointed out he tackled a live gunman when he threatened their family. Izuku still didn't feel like a hero, especially with a bullet in his leg, but he accepted the dinner. Now, here he was, sitting at the same table in the same room he had tackled a gunner in. It was odd, but it wasn't so jarring that it set him off. Besides several thank yous, when he first arrived, nobody had overwhelmed him with their presence. His mom might have warned them, but Izuku liked to think they were just being mindful. That was, except for Setsuna. The green-haired girl had snatched the seat next to Izuku from his mother and had been pelting him with questions. What school do you go to? Setsuna asked. I'm homeschooled. Izuku replied. Why? Setsuna asked. I didn't want to be around kids my age. Izuku replied. I'm a kid your age. Do you want to be around me? Setsuna asked. Izuku blushed a little bit. Why, you're fine as long as I don't get overwhelmed, Izuku replied. How do I not dash? Setsuna was cut off by her mother. Setsuna. He is our guest. Mrs. Tokage said, soft but also firm. Her shoulders slumped and she leaned away from him and settled back into her seat. Without any other conversation going, Setsuna's lack of questions made the dinner feel awkward. Izuku pondered her questions. They all seemed very normal, but there was a lack of authenticity. Like she was holding some questions back. Finishing his noodles, Izuku glanced at her. Their eyes barely caught the other before Setsuna directed them into her half-finished soup. She had been looking at his arm. Izuku thought. She hadn't known about his disability. The prosthetic worked wonders, he thought. He looked over towards Setsuna's mother and shook his head. No, it's okay. I broke into your house. She can ask anything she wants. Izuku said. Across the table, Mr. Tokage choked back a laugh. His wife did a poor attempt at hiding her giggles, however, so the table burst into laughter. Izuku hadn't been joking, but he wasn't going to say anything. He laughed with them, despite himself. Izuku made a gesture to everybody as the laughter died down, pointing at them and then himself. Ask away. Just give me a little break afterward, please. Izuku said. With polite smiles on everybody's faces, Mrs. Tokage was the first to ask a question. Why were you out in the streets in the first place? We didn't get a good look at the fighting at the time, but the news report made it seem really bad. She asked. Izuku pondered this for a moment. The news report hadn't mentioned him in the slightest, probably because his mother asked for him to be unnamed. They hadn't covered him being thrown from a flying car or him using his quirk in public. On that end, nobody seemed to mention it to him. He guessed nobody wanted him to get in trouble since he had already been shot and all. Well, I was with one of my mentors. We kinda were in an argument when his car got destroyed by a villain. After that, I realized what was going on in your store and tried to come help. Izuku said. Finishing his sentence, he bit into some pork that the Tokages cooked. It fell apart in his mouth perfectly. It took everything he had not to in delight. The Tokaiges, for not owning a restaurant, knew their way around a kitchen. Setsuna spoke up. Mentor? I thought you were homeschooled. She asked. Izuku paused, unsure of how to respond. He put his fork down, having finished all his food. Well, I have a few connections to heroes, right? I decided I wanted to live my life with honor, in service to others. So I got a mentor to become a hero. Izuku only faintly recalled that he had just emulated All Might's final words to them, but he ignored it. This wasn't a time to get down in the dumps. He wasn't sure what he expected as a response, but he hadn't expected the absolute silence he received. His mother was giving him a pained look, but it was a familiar one. It was her signature look of regretful pride that she wore whenever he said something dramatic. The other looks he received were foreign, however. Across the board, the Tokaiges looked concerned. In all, Izuku didn't know how to react to this response, so he kept quiet. Dinner wrapped up within a few minutes. After cleaning up, the Tokaiges invited them to stay a while longer, which the Midoriyas agreed to. The adults and the children split apart naturally, with Inko and Setsuna's parents taking the living room and Midoriya and Setsuna taking her room. As Izuku walked behind Setsuna into her room, he flushed. Being in a girl's room was unimaginable to Izuku. Even before the incident, Izuku didn't talk to girls. They either avoided him, bullied him, or interacted with him minimally if they had to. He understood why, of course, but that didn't make it better for him in any way. Now put into a position where he was with a girl in her room, he didn't know what to do. So, he just stood awkwardly on the threshold and watched as she sat down on her bed. Sweat began to trickle down his back and he wondered what he should do. Setsuna's voice caught his attention. What are you doing? There's a desk over there, you can sit there if you like. She said. Izuku, still feeling uncomfortable, accepted her offer and robotically made his way over to the office chair. Sitting in it, he found it to be more comfortable than his own. He continued to not say anything as he began to listen to the clock tick by on the wall. Eventually, Setsuna sighed, bored. Hey Midoriya. You know you called me Setsuna, right? She said. Izuku's face went bright red in a flash. He remembered when he had been leaking smoke and asked her to scout the alleyway in a hurry. Oh crap, I'm sorry. That was way too personal. It's just that I didn't want to confuse you and your parents. Oh please, I don't care. I kind of like it, to be honest. I just thought it was funny since you're so awkward. Setsuna said, giggling. Izuku's shoulders drooped. Oh yeah, I am pretty awkward. He knew he struggled around people even more so these days, but hearing it was a slap in the face. He leaned a little deeper into the comfortable chair. Setsuna looked at him, realizing her mistake. Oh, it's not a bad thing, you know. You really were cool during the attack. Izuku looked back at her, confused. I appreciate it, but don't. Whatever Izuku was about to say died in his throat as Setsuna walked over to him. Grabbing his hand, she hauled him to his feet, unapologetically pulling him into a hug. Izuku felt like his face was on fire as Setsuna's arms wrapped around him. He was so out of his depth that he didn't stop her or hug her back. He just stood there. She didn't pull away. In his ear, he heard a small sniffle. Why? You jumped on that JRK the second he saw me and my mom. I would have lived if I got shot because I can heal, but my mom, you saved her. You really were heroic, dude. Setsuna said, stifling her tears. Izuku was frozen, but slowly, ever so carefully, he placed his palms on her back. He didn't say anything, he couldn't. What made you come to us? What were you thinking when you decided to try and help? Was it because I helped you get your stupid sunshine soap? Is that why you risked your life for us? For me? Setsuna begged. Izuku's head began to swim from the stimuli and emotion rampaging through his body. I didn't think. I did it because no one else would. Izuku muttered. Down beneath his pants, he could feel the stitches in his leg from the bullet wound burn. After some time, Setsuna pulled away. Her eyes were red. Izuku, Setsuna began. He felt his heart skip a beat at his first name. You asked me if I wanted to be a hero when we first met, right? I said I wasn't sure, but after what you did, I think I'm going to be a hero. Izuku felt great as he prepared for bed. The dinner with the Tokages was delicious, and after Setsuna and Izuku's heartfelt moment, they just hung out for a while. It was nice, much nicer than Izuku had expected. He'd never really had any mutual friends, so it was a novel experience. He was sitting on his bed now, practicing smokescreen. Ever since he had gotten out of the hospital, he could use the quirk at will. That being said, him using the quirk was just him turning it off and on again with his window open. It was still an odd feeling to actually have a quirk. Of course, he had one for all, but he was still a few years off of being able to practice it. Smokescreen was a quirk that didn't strain his body in the same way the strength enhancement did, so he could freely use and practice it. Izuku had started a new hero's journal recently. He had dedicated a chapter's length to thinking about how to use the quirk, its limitations, and a training guide for when Night Eye or Gran Torino weren't instructing him. And had been right, Izuku decided. The quirk wasn't helpful if Izuku overused it. If he or his allies couldn't see through his smoke, then it would be more harmful than good. Izuku had spent hours daydreaming scenarios on how he could fight somebody with the smoke. His best ideas were concealing his concise movements and sectioning off and dividing groups of villains. It wasn't extensive, but without knowing the power's full extent, it was all he had. He wasn't skilled enough to implement either yet, but he figured it would be good to brainstorm early. Izuku coughed, realizing he had let smokescreen go off unattended for too long as he zoned out. He cut off the quirk before turning up his fan. Deeming that his practice had been sufficient for the night, he decided to sleep. Izuku fluffed his pillows and adjusted his blankets as he slipped under the sheets. He turned off his bedside lamp and let his head hit the pillow. He closed his eyes, but instead of drifting off to sleep, Izuku felt his mind and body be vacuumed far, far away from his bed. In a panic, Izuku opened his eyes. He was back in the throne room of One for All. "Oh, you're back already?" An said, Izuku having been dropped at his feet. Izuku, here for the second time and consequently less surprised, nodded. He paused, intrigued that he could nod. Izuku took stock of his body. 2 weeks ago, when he had been inside One for All, which was still weird, he decided, he had been nothing more than eyes and a left arm. Now though, his head was fully formed down to his jaw, which was still missing. He had generated pieces of his neck and a shoulder, connecting his head and his arm on a tiny strip of flesh. Now able to maneuver with more comfort, he got up. He didn't have legs and was consequently floating, but when he moved around, he felt the natural rhythm and bounce of walking on 2 feet. And, alongside the other people, left him by his lonesome as he explored. The throne room looked like it had been repaired somewhat since his last visit. He wasn't sure if this was because time had passed, or because he had gotten a bit better with smokescreen. That thought gave Izuku pause. He really was in a mental construct of his quirk. It wasn't some fever dream, it was much too vivid. Izuku wondered if other people with quirks had this. He'd never heard of them being talked about, but maybe they were extremely private. As he wandered around aimlessly, he remembered the last thing he saw in the throne room. The man who had given him his quirk. A man who Izuku had killed. Izuku marched back over to the round table, where the previous holders were sitting in silence. The 8th chair was still empty. Izuku cut into his palm again, the same way he had communicated last time, and smeared a question on the pristine table. "Where am? Do you mean Toshi?" The buff woman replied. Izuku reminded himself that All Might's name was Toshinori as he nodded. The woman looked at him, sympathy overflowing from her gaze. It was impressive, to be honest, the amount of compassion this woman exuded. Izuku underlined where. The woman shook her head. "Here. But he's hiding. We see the world through your eyes, kid, and we all know how you feel. Toshinori, his guilt is almost as strong as yours." The woman said. Izuku felt his left hand tighten. He wanted to ask so many questions, but his lack of a mouth denied him that privilege. 9. Don't think it's because he doesn't think you're doing a good job at using One for All. None of us were sure at first, but we felt what you felt when you tried to save the Tokages. We accept you, even Toshinori. His guilt lies elsewhere. The woman said. Izuku was tempted to underline where again, but he held off. Maybe it wasn't so bad that All Might was hiding, Izuku thought. The previous holders were right, he wasn't ready to see him. And if Izuku was pulled into this little world every time he fell asleep, then not seeing his greatest sin would be a good thing. Izuku looked around. He didn't feel the call of consciousness pulling at his phantom body. He'd be here for a while, he could tell. Across the table, En was looking at him as if he had the same idea as Izuku. Smiling as best he could without a mouth, Izuku cut into his palm once more. Teach me smokescreen. Gran Torino took a sip of his lemonade as he watched Izuku and Night Eye. The two were doing basic hand-to-hand combat with occasional breaks for strategy. He was just overseeing the process today, as his back felt extra sore this morning. Sorahiko had spent much of last night patrolling his home city for crime, and couldn't be bothered to play with the two youngsters today. That wasn't to say he wasn't paying attention. Night Eye always had the capacity to be a great instructor, but it hadn't shown until he had accepted Izuku. Since then, Night Eye had redesigned his schedule so that instead of only showing up once or twice a week, he now watched over every lesson. With Night Eye no longer being a hard-ass, Izuku was much more receptive to the man's teachings. That is to say, Izuku was now learning a mile a minute. Izuku still wasn't fit enough to contend with either himself or Night Eye, but he was getting closer. Once he hit PBRTY and they could begin training his strength enhancement, he did not doubt that Izuku would surpass them in raw stats. What was important was drilling technique and skill into the boy while they still had time. You're in an open area. Night Eye called out to Izuku. The boy's body began to emit smoke, enough to cover most of his movements, but not to overtake his face. This was the primary drill that Night Eye had chosen for the past week. Izuku emitted smoke, Night Eye would spar him, and then he would force Izuku to change the smoke's output levels. The exercise did several things at once, and it worked like a charm. Izuku could practice the basics of smokescreen, hone his hand-to-hand, and learn to fight with his quirk all in one motion. Compound exercises like this were the lifeblood of his training, but they also had days to work on specific things. Now that Night Eye was with them daily, the complexity of individual sessions grew. Izuku no longer ran a parkour course while dodging baseballs. Now, he had to catch every third ball while being chased by Night Eye through a more complicated course. If Izuku fell behind any pace faster than his best, Night Eye would strike at the boy. Lord, Gran Torino thought. If his mother knew just exactly what we were doing, she might blow a fuse. He likened this training to his days as a UA teacher, specifically when taking the kids to summer camp. Despite how pleasant it sounds, this summer camp was much closer to a boot camp than a hiking trip. Throughout the real school year, students honed their skills, strategy, and STEM knowledge. But it was during summer camp that they were forced to exercise their quirk's real muscles. He chortled, remembering all the students he tortured. If he didn't hate kids so much, he might have liked the job enough to keep it. Midoriya was an exception. Perhaps it was the trauma, but he was reserved and quiet. He was respectful to boot, and that made him the ideal student for Sorahiko. The boy was easy to teach, so much so that it was almost concerning. Izuku had natural smarts, a great work ethic, and supreme reflexes. The only thing holding the boy back was a mix of three things: inexperience, age, and overthinking. Unfortunately for Izuku, all three were going to take time. Eventually, though, the boy would grow into a man, which covered two of his problems. But Torino wasn't sure how to shake out the overthinking. It pained his heart to watch the boy spar. No smoke. Night Eye called out. Izuku's smoke dissipated completely. Sorahiko watched as the two began a simple exchange. Night Eye held back the strength of his blows while making his attacks obvious before they launched. In the future, Night Eye would dial up the strength and dial down the obviousness, but the point was to get Izuku to pick up on fighting patterns. Night Eye stood in a strong back position, before twisting his back leg outwards and putting his weight forward. To Gran Torino's eyes, he was clearly going for a roundhouse kick. To Izuku, Night Eye was also clearly going for a roundhouse kick. No problem, right? Wrong. Gran Torino watched as Izuku's gaze locked onto the larger man's back leg, rotating hips and arm position. The problem came in when Izuku didn't focus on those things. Like a ping-pong ball bouncing around a tiny box, Izuku's eyes looked at everything. Sorahiko could tell that the boy knew a roundhouse kick was coming but was so busy processing everything that he couldn't react in time. Izuku received a kick to the ear, knocking him to the floor. Izuku got back up, rubbing his ear. No blood, that was good. Probably rang like hell. He got back into the stance Night Eye taught him. Right side forward, arm bent tightly with a hand at chin level, feet shoulder width apart. It was a stance meant to allow Izuku room to feel out an opponent while also preparing his weight distribution for a spinning hook opener. Of course, he wasn't supposed to use that as an opener every time, but it was a building block. His overthinking wasn't the only problem, Sorahiko thought. He watched as Izuku bounced toward Night Eye, feet barely touching the floor as he prepared to send his own kick. Izuku got in his range to attack, but instead of kicking, he hovered there, unsure of what to do. The boy didn't even realize that his legs were already twisted in the perfect position to emulate Night Eye's roundhouse. After half a second of hovering there, Izuku's footing switched and he went in for a palm strike. Night Eye easily batted Izuku away, unfazed. Izuku's two biggest issues, in reality, were the same. Izuku's body and instincts had the making of a legendary mixed martial artist, but his mind was holding him back. That and the lack of a right arm. Even though Izuku's body had already prepared for a reaction during both encounters, Izuku hesitated before choosing something else entirely. It made for an awkward, clumsy fight. Sorahiko sighed. Night Eye knew this, he knew this, and yet they didn't have a good idea on how to beat it out of him without hypnotizing the brat. He set his drink down and got up, stretching his back to knock out any cricks and pains. Sorahiko was going to get involved with today's session, and that meant overtaxing his back. Gran Torino was going to have to take a vacation after this. "Hey, let me talk to the brat for a minute," he called out to Night Eye, who was dancing around Izuku. The man nodded and made his way back to their rest area. Izuku collapsed on the sweat-filled mat he'd been on for the past 30 minutes, exhausted. Torino let the boy sit because he'd be drilling the hell out of him after he was done ranting to the boy. "Do you know why Night Eye kicks your butt every time?" he asked. Izuku looked at him, dumbfounded. "Is it because he's twice my height with 2 decades of experience on me?" Izuku replied. Sorahiko didn't entertain the boy with a laugh, he just cut right to the point. "No, it's because you're fighting more than just Night Eye. You're fighting yourself," he replied. Izuku's face was the epitome of confusion. "Fighting myself? Is this some kind of cheesy joke?" Izuku said. Torino shook his head. "Your instincts are impeccable. Some of the best I've ever seen, among heroes and martial artists alike." He began. For some reason, his words seemed to have struck a nerve within the boy, as the kid's gait turned defensive. "But you overthink things. Tell me, what ran through your mind right before you got kicked in the head a few minutes ago?" Torino continued. Izuku sat in silence as he looked at his hand, contemplating the question. "I saw his back leg move, so I thought he'd kick me. I tried to dodge, but Gran Torino cut him off right there." The boy wasn't even self-aware. "No. You saw his leg move back for a kick and decided, for whatever reason, to look at his hands, chest, face, shoulders, and just about everything else before getting kicked in the head," he said. Izuku was lost, and he could tell. Am I supposed to ignore everything else? Either way, I still wasn't fast enough to avoid the kick, so does it matter? Izuku said. Gran Torino groaned. "Stop being an idiot, brat. Night Eye." He called over to the resting area. "What is it?" Night Eye asked, walking back over to them. Sorahiko turned away from Izuku, who was still sitting on the floor. "Next time you're out, go buy a camera. We need to start recording Izuku's spars and making him watch them back. I think if he sees what he's doing wrong, he'll be able to fix himself. Brat," he turned back to Izuku. "Give me 30 push-ups. I'll get back to you on your issues soon enough." Well, Izuku thought, at least he didn't topple over. Picking up groceries for his mom, Izuku was stealing glances at his phone. Mr. Tokage would have been ringing up his items, but he had to take a call. Knowing the man was busy enough as is, Izuku decided to wait to check out until he finished. Maybe it was the wrong call, but the way that Mr. Tokage's shoulders seemed to relax told him he appreciated it. So, he just sat by the counter and rewatched his most recent spar with Night Eye. Third-person perspectives were always weird. No matter how serious or focused he felt in the moment, he looked silly in retrospect. Or, Izuku mused, he just always looked silly. He finally understood what Gran Torino had been talking about, but the flower of that understanding had by no means bloomed. His hesitation felt ingrained in him, and no matter how much he practiced, he still hadn't beaten his awkwardness. Izuku was chipping away at it. He paused the video the moment Night Eye kicked him in the chest. Even though his eyes were bugging and spit was flying out of his mouth, that kick had been different. For the first time in all his sparring with Night Eye, a successful attack hadn't knocked him out. He angled his chest so the kick, while connecting, transmitted only a fraction of the force. Sure, Night Eye knocked him on his but it was an improvement. Dialing back the replay speed, Izuku rewound to the beginning, intending to watch his fight as closely as possible. Instead, however, all he saw when he gazed into his phone was the reflection of two floating eyeballs behind him. Juj, Izuku said, his phone jerking out of his hands. Hysterical laughter echoed around him as he scrambled to catch his new phone. In his surprise, he slapped the phone even further from himself. Panic ate at him. It had been a very recent gift and breaking it so soon would seal his doom. Covering his eyes and turning away, he resigned himself to the phone's fate. A second passed, but no sound of shattering glass cursed his ears. His fingers spread apart as he gave it a hesitant peek. "Boo," Setsuna said, her floating face an inch away from his. For the second time that day, Izuku squawked in fright. Oh man, you're too easy." "Huh," she said, holding his phone in a floating hand. Izuku slumped, letting his back slide against the counter, and he dropped to the floor. Groaning into his hands, Izuku gave out a pitiful whimper. "Ogatse, you're gonna kill me one day," he said, his arm going limp by his side. Setsuna gave him a shark's grin, reassembling her parts into a more human shape, but not giving over his phone. Ignoring his comment, the girl began inspecting his phone. Not bothering to stop her, Izuku focused on getting his racing heart under control. Tapping the play button, the girl began giving the video a once-over, a small pout tugging on her lips when she realized it was in slow motion. "Hey, see, can I have that back, please?" Izuku tried to say, but the girl interrupted him as her jaw literally dropped to the floor, a squeal ripping out of her throat. "Holy crap, Izu! Is that Night Eye? Sir Night Eye?" the girl said, her voice coming from the floor where her mouth was. Izuku paled as he scrambled to his feet, trying to snatch his phone back from the girl, forgetting his video with Night Eye was open. His haste wasn't rewarded, as Setsuna simply popped her top from her legs and floated out of his reach, still watching the video. "That is his brother," Izuku said, wincing. Even though her face was disfigured and in multiple pieces, he could still see her expression morph into one of, "You serious? Dude, your mentor is Night Eye? Holy wow. And I thought I had friends in high places," Setsuna said. Izuku's gaze whipped between her mouth on the floor and her eyes on the ceiling, having no idea which to look at. "Friends in high places? Who do you?" Izuku said in between spikes of excitement from his video. Even though it was slow and reverbed, the action was fast enough that the sounds of grunts and successful attacks were distinct. They both winced after a particularly bad blow to his sternum. He rubbed his stomach where a purple silhouette of Night Eye's shoe had printed itself. Setsuna floated down, becoming whole once again. Dang. My cousin, oh wow. Did he really kick you that hard?" Setsuna asked, the exact frame where Izuku's body folded over like a piece of paper. He didn't really know what to say. Nobody had told him to keep his training a secret, but he got the impression that Night Eye would discourage him from revealing it. Stealing a glance at his phone, he sighed. She already saw it. It wasn't like telling her the bare bones of it would hurt. And not really. He pulls his punches most of the time. Still hurt though, I guess," Izuku said. The girl had an odd look on her face like she had eaten something with an unfamiliar flavor. Not bad, but it had been out of her comfort zone. Do you do that kind of thing all the time?" she asked, her eyes refusing to meet his as a stray finger swirled loops with a lock of her hair. Her voice had taken on a faraway quality, as if she was thinking about something else. Why, I kind of need to, otherwise I can't really be a hero, let alone a good one. Why, you know about my arm. Half the arms, double the effort. Or triple, I guess. He said, rolling his shoulder with the prosthetic for emphasis. She still didn't look at him. You really want to be a hero, huh? Of course. Don't you want to as well? I thought you said so that one time. His cheeks took on a slight flush as he said it, remembering their hug. Yeah, are you okay? She asked, pulling her hairlock taut in the same movement as she turned to him. Her swamp green eyes bore into his own, their darker color reflecting a sense of seriousness. Izuku swallowed. Another question he didn't know how to answer. He'd met her a few times since their dinner. They always had a chat or something close, but they rarely talked about heavy stuff. The most she'd even mentioned about his arm was offhanded questions about his prosthetic. She knew he had baggage, but she'd never seriously grilled him on it. It was one of the reasons why he felt so comfortable around her. Something squirmed in his chest when he thought about answering, but he pushed past it to appease her. My therapist thinks I'm doing better, but there are areas for improvement, Izuku admitted. Setsuna's eyebrows shot to her forehead, literally popping off her head in surprise. She stumbled back, shaking her hands out as if to stop him. I meant like, from the kick. You don't gotta talk about all that. It's fine. A fierce blush exploded on both their faces from his oversharing. Izuku immediately began rattling off apologies and tried backing away, but only bumped back into the counter and fell on his butt. Oh my! Setsuna said, trying to stop his descent but only tangling herself and falling down with him. With her added weight, Izuku's back hit the ground with double the force, knocking the air out of his lungs. She rolled off his chest as soon as possible, panicking as Izuku coughed, struggling for air. In their mini frenzy, neither noticed as the hatch to her apartment opened and Mr. Tokage climbed down, pocketing his phone. It wasn't that big of a deal. Not even a few seconds after Izuku finally caught his breath, he made eye contact with Setsuna. A foreign feeling of warmth flushed through him as he looked at her from below. Her worry faded as their eyes locked. Neither moved for a second too. 3 seconds went by, and they burst into giggles. They laughed so hard that Mr. Tokage was able to get to his counter and sit down without the kids noticing him. They laughed so hard that they never noticed how Mr. Tokage watched them, bagging and checking out all of Izuku's items. They never saw the smile gracing his lips. Good Lord Izu, I've never seen an apology go so poorly before. Setsuna said, helping the boy to his feet. His face was still a radiant, bright red while a pink tinge still hung loosely on her cheeks. Sorry. I should have been more careful. Nah, it's cool. I can kinda get the confusion. Alright. Can I have my phone back? Definitely not, hold on, Setsuna said, reaching into her back pocket to pull out an identical device. The only difference from his was a cartoon Tyrannosaurus sticker covering the brand logo. She tapped their corners together. Both phones buzzed, and Setsuna pressed a button that looked suspiciously like accept on his device. She fiddled with it a bit more before handing it over, a triumphant smile on her face. Yeah, check it, she said, pointing at the new contact. A Setsunosaurus. Next to it was a little pterosaur holding a littler pterosaur. Izuku looked at it like it was a 24-carat diamond. He glanced at the contact, then at her before bouncing back. Are you sure? I don't really know how to text. Or call. He said, hesitant like she would realize she made a mistake. She nodded, bouncing a little in place. For sure. Even if you don't, you can just practice with me, she said, as if it wasn't the most embarrassing thing he'd ever heard. His dying blush reanimated itself, stronger than ever. He turned a little, just enough so he wasn't looking directly at her. This is sure. Why did you put an A next to it? Or added all those dinosaur thingies? He said, only just able to choke out the question. Her grin morphed into her more familiar shark grin. I like dinos. I thought that part was obvious. Also, she said, getting close enough to point at the A on his contact. With that, I'll always be on the top of your list, even if my name would alphabetically be at the bottom. Izuku simply could not compute that answer, inching away from the girl as if he'd explode if he stood next to her for even a second longer. What he hadn't expected, however, was to see her father watching them as he turned to the counter. His soul left his body. Hours later, after Izuku had retrieved his soul and had gone home, Setsuna Tokage was thinking of the perfect first text for Izuku when she heard her door open. It had already been ajar, but she knew how the hinges squeaked when they were at the halfway mark. So, the top of his list, her father said, a smirk gracing his deceptive older features. Blood rushed up the back of her neck at the same speed that she closed the messenger app she had opened. Grabbing a Stegosaurus plushie, she chucked it at her father full force. It stopped an inch from his face, his arms never moving before it was flung back at her at half the speed. It bonked still her on the head. Your mom is gonna love this. She already thinks you two will be very cute very soon, he said. Setsuna groaned, miserable. Please, have mercy, she asked, sliding off the bed onto her knees, hands clasped out. In front of her. Her father didn't budge. No. This is your punishment for teasing that boy so much. Deal with it. Oh, and set the table soon. Dinner is almost ready, he said, before closing her door like he hadn't just sentenced her to death. Pouting, she grabbed her stego off the ground and squeezed it against her chest. She fingered her hair a bit, pulling and twirling it absent-minded. That video, she couldn't get her mind off it. Even when she fell on him and when she was adding herself to his contacts. It had been replaying in the background of her mind since. He was just so nonchalant about it. Sure, he'd stuttered and blundered his way through his admission, and sure, he'd lied and only told her a partial truth, but still. Whatever he was involved in, no matter who he was involved with, he was dedicated. That kick would have put her out of commission for a month, let alone just bruise her a little. She got the impression that it hadn't been the first time, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. Rolling onto her side, she wondered how often he did that kind of thing, and if it was worth it to him. She had told him she wanted to be a hero. It hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment claim. She'd been thinking about it the whole week he'd been in the hospital and the week leading up to their dinner. What he did, however, was barely imaginable. Breaking into their house just to help them, first off, had been wild. It was something she'd imagine All Might doing, not someone her age. Second, he jumped a live gunman. She'd never seen a civilian do anything like that. Really, she'd never seen a hero do it. Heroes just didn't grapple gun-wielding gangsters unless they were bulletproof, and those heroes worked higher-profile jobs than street crime. Third, he did it all with just a right arm and ball of steel. She could sort of imagine what it was like to be an amputee. She'd misplaced her disconnected limbs a lot when her quirk first came in. She'd go hours lopsided and uncomfortable, but that was incomparable to simply not having one. Curiosity had her by the ball, but she tried to avoid asking. Her mom had made it clear that she wasn't to just up and ask him. She had always played with the idea of being a hero, but hadn't been sure until she watched him become one. If he could do it, all without an arm or a combat quirk, then there was no excuse for her. There was no world where she could watch him save her family and not want to be like him. To be a hero. It was simply a new fact of her life. Something uncomfortable shot through her gut. But his passion dwarfed hers. She couldn't imagine herself ever working as hard as he seemed to. She had a good work ethic. She was at the top of her class, the leader of the Jurassic Club, and the prospective captain of the track team, assuming Maruka quit next semester like she said. She could do whatever she put her mind to. That didn't mean she liked it. In fact, she despised wasting effort on any task. She did just enough to excel, and that was that. Izuku was clearly doing more than that, and it made her stomach turn. How could she look at someone like him and tell him she had an interest in heroism when it seemed to be his whole world? He was disabled, for God's sake, and she felt inadequate next to him. She couldn't ignore what he did. Jumping that gunman had made that impossible. She'd be a hero. She needed to be a hero. She just hated her own lack of passion. Her indecisiveness. Setsuna rolled over to her other side. He was just so cool. Really, really dorky but cool. She pressed her face into her stego, inhaling its scent. Her stomach was still doing flips when she got up. She still needed to set the table. A frown plastered itself on her lips as she walked out into the living room, and she got the impression that it'd hang around for a while. At least, until her phone buzzed. "Hello, Tokic. Thank you for the contact. I am apologetic for leaving so soon after your father frightened me. Please enjoy the rest of your night." The discomfort in her gut seemed to fall away as she read and reread the message. He was right about not knowing how to text. Shooting back a quick reply, she walked into the kitchen feeling much lighter. "Call me Setsanosaurus." Or Set, smiley face. "All right, Midoriya, what's this?" Gran Torino asked as Izuku handed him a notepad. Night Eye also looked interested. He motioned them to flip through it. He'd been working on it for almost a month, now, and he wanted a professional's opinion. He'd handwritten copies too, so they could each get one and he'd have one left over. "They're all my notes on Smokescreen. My measured improvements, hypothetical workouts, and my theories," Izuku said, proud. Both older men looked intrigued. He hadn't really shown off his hero notebooks, so he wasn't surprised that they seemed skeptical. He pulled another out and handed one to Night Eye, who picked it up hesitantly, but curious. "Theories?" the taller man muttered. Izuku nodded. "Like, things on my fine control, maximum output, general possibilities, and even some attack moves," he said. Gran Torino nodded, not appearing to listen. Thumbing the edge, he let all the pages flip open. It was half an inch thick, each page filled to the brim with tiny handwriting, only interrupted with large diagrams. The older man flipped the notebook upside down, realizing that Izuku had also written on the backs of each page, not the front. Night Eye mirrored him but seemed to take the time to at least skim each line. They both hummed. Gran Torino grunted. "Night Eye," the older man said. "Have it photocopied and put it through an audio translator. My optometrist told me to avoid reading this much. I'll listen to it on my next patrol," he said. Night Eye, however, didn't seem to hear him, apparently absorbed in Izuku's notebook. The shorter majority of their trio watched in silence as the man seemingly became more and more engaged in the writing. After about half a minute of his intense scrutiny, Izuku gained enough confidence to lightly tap the man's shoulder, ripping him free of his concentration. "What oh?" Night Eye said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Midoriya." Yes, sir?" "Excuse my language. This is FING fantastic. Is this your first ever quirk analysis?" Night Eye asked, rising to his full height. Izuku shook his head. Not really. I've been writing in these kinds of notebooks all my life. This was just the first quirk I've had the pleasure of personally testing. 'Cause, you know," he said. Night Eye nodded at this, snapping the notepad. "Tomorrow, you are going to bring me every single notebook so I can digitize them. I want to read them all. Furthermore, with your express permission, I am going to redact all relevant personal information and information about One for All before sending this to a quirk professor. From those first few pages alone, I doubt I could seriously give you the level of criticism that you need." Night Eye said. Izuku and Gran Torino gaped at him, the latter reopening the notepad to give it a second glance. "Are you sure, sir? I don't really think that." "Positive. I suppose this begs the question, how is your schooling? Were you at grade-wise? Is this your magnum opus, or do you consider your other topics to be at a similar level?" Night Eye asked. I don't know. I guess I'm most passionate about quirk theory, but it's not necessarily that much better than anything else. Currently, my schooling is around 11th grade? Late high school, I guess. I've been blazing through it since starting remote learning." Izuku said. A pang shot through his heart at mentioning remote learning. He still needed to make a stable relationship with someone his age, or else Fujimaki would make him go back to school. He ignored the coincidental buzz in his pocket. Setsuna could wait. He was busy. Both heroes looked at him in a new light. They, generally, weren't very involved in his life outside of his training. Izuku supposed they did have a larger relationship than mentor and student, but it wasn't by much. Sometimes they went out for lunch, or Izuku would relax at their house after an extra grueling training session. They never really interested themselves in his academics or personal life. 11th grade, huh? I guess that doesn't mean much. Some schools' 12th grade classes are shittier than another 6th. Still, are you some kind of genius, brat? Gran Torino asked, causing a massive blush to explode on Izuku's face. No. I'm just completing the coursework faster because I don't have to wait for teachers to give it out. Gran Torino raised an eyebrow. Izuku's blush deepened. Night Eye was eyeing more of the notepad. Well, this is fun, kid, but you've missed out on about 10 minutes of running with this little notepad diversion of yours. Hit the track. Mirai. The older man motioned. Closing the booklet with a sharp snap, Night Eye jumped into action. Izuku screamed as the man sprinted after him, a pocket watch appearing in his hand. Mirai Sasaki felt off balance. He'd done his job, run Izuku ragged on the track while keeping him at his personal best. He'd only had to actually attack the boy once, as today was another day in a row that Izuku broke his previous record. It didn't happen every day or even every week, but Izuku's improvements usually happened in clusters. In almost every aspect, the boy was getting better. His coordination was better than a normal kid his age, even considering the accident. His agility was encroaching on those of Shiketsu applicants. His use of smokescreen grew by leaps and bounds every day. The only thing he still struggled with on a fundamental level was hand-to-hand combat. And Night Eye finally had the answer why in his back pocket. The notepad was at least 60 pages thick. Izuku fit 2 lines between the college rule guidelines, back to front with detailed illustrations in addition. Izuku had written, at the lowest end, 3 separate versions of it by hand for them. The boy made the term overthink an understatement. He'd thought the boy was just someone who thought aloud often. Night Eye often caught the tail end of the boy's mutterings but had chalked it up to being nothing more than a personality quirk. That was wrong. His ideas weren't simply jumping to his lips, but they were spilling out of his brain. His mutterings were just an overflow of everything else that ran through his head. You don't just write a 120-page long thesis on a quirk you got a month ago. You don't just jump 6 grade levels because your teachers were slow. Maybe the boy wasn't a genius. Hypothetically, Night Eye could just be underestimating the amount of bad among the good of his quirk analysis. Perhaps he might just be underestimating what true genius was. There was an off chance his theory on Izuku was wrong, but he doubted it. The boy's rapidly growing athleticism, something admirable, might be his most underwhelming trait. Izuku wasn't hesitating so much in their spars because he was looking at the wrong things. He couldn't help but look at everything. It was the skill a fighter learned after decades of study and practice, to see everything all at once and know how to exactly counter and react. Night Eye was certain Izuku could fluently speak the language of battle. He just couldn't read or write it, and it made him second-guess himself. He cut Izuku's session in half, overriding Sorahiko's complaints. Getting this notebook to people who knew how to cultivate this kind of skill was far more important than the boy's midweek workout. He might have sped home. Of course, driving over the limit was ill-advised, but he never had anything to worry about. Not only did he know that no officers would pull him over, but he also knew that he wouldn't crash. There had been a few times in the past decade where that hadn't been the case, but Mirai had been thorough in lessening the damage done by staying slow and being careful before it happened. Stopping by the office, he photoprinted a copy before going home and handling his routine. Without ever touching the original, Night Eye took a thick Sharpie and began striking out the necessary pieces. People needed to read this, he had decided, but people did not need to know about One for All. No one did. Not even his old peers at UA, not even Sasami Fujimaki, the queen of general studies 97 foot and his high school sweetheart. Izuku was brimming with nervous excitement. His training had ended early today and therefore he was taking a different train home. Or, rather, the same train at a different time. Still, walking over to his normal seat, far away from the handicap section, it felt different. The people he'd come to associate with his ride home were nowhere to be found, replaced by stranger, more alien people. It wasn't like he knew his fellow passengers personally, but the comfort of consistency was eradicated, leaving him a little antsy to get home. On top of all that was Night Eye's odd behavior and wild declarations. He wanted to die from the embarrassment when he announced he wanted to have it professionally looked at. Izuku never wanted to make a big deal out of it, he just wanted them to give him a yay or nay. Maybe they could have tested out his ideas in the big warehouse. Or, they could have had a discussion about his theories. The radical reaction from Night Eye had been the last thing he wanted. It was exciting though. The thought of a real, honest quirk analyst giving him feedback sent happy jitters down his spine. It didn't even matter if they didn't like it if he was honest. Just the novelty of someone appreciating his efforts felt fantastic. Izuku felt like he was on top of the world. He shot a text at Setsuna, trying his best to be less formal. A small smile graced his lips when, as soon as the message delivered, Setsuna's tiny pterosaurs popped up to read it. Before the girl's reply came back, however, a voice interrupted him. One that he had almost forgotten, but still struck a deep chord within him. Deku? The hell re you doin' in my seat? TW, violence within the first half. Bakugo looked tired. It honestly threw Izuku for a loop. He was so used to the boy's normal appearance, prickly, alert. Like he was always ready to burst out of his clothes for a scuffle. His Bakugo had looked like a ticking time bomb, always an inch away from exploding. This Bakugo looked more like a steam engine, bubbling and exuding pressure, but measured. Controlled. The blonde boy dressed casually, like he'd just come back from an outing with his goons. Though, Izuku noted, he couldn't see any of the usual SCK-ups. Maybe he'd told his boys to screw off one too many times, but from the way his palms were twitching, maybe he'd been doing some secret training. Shaky hands were his tell that he'd exhausted his quirk. Izuku didn't know how you secretly practiced lighting off explosions in a city, but he wasn't a judge. He wanted to get out of Bakugo's way. More than anything, he just wanted to avoid confrontation. Scrambling to his feet, Izuku turned to the train's exit. Waiting a few extra hours for his train would be easier than dealing with the blonde. Before he could even take a step, however, two things happened. First, he felt a steel grip on his tricep, holding him in place. Second, the train doors slammed closed. A brief yellow light flashed overhead, warning of the impending acceleration before the view of the station slid out of view. "Haraya going?" Bakugo said, tugging on his arm. It wasn't rough, but to Izuku, it felt like a branding iron clamped on him. Robotically, Izuku turned to face the taller boy, unable to respond like a reasonable human. Huffing, Bakugo shoved his arm out of his grip. Izuku stumbled. Hello Kkkkkchan. Izuku tried to say, his throat growing tighter and drier with every syllable. Kaken gave him an exasperated look before slipping past him and sitting in Izuku's place, not even bothering to move Izuku's bag. He cast a blatant look in his direction, not bothering to hide how he studied him. His eyes trailed from his bright sneakers, up his newly muscular legs, and lingered on the tips of his fake fingers. A war waged inside Izuku. It was a harsh battle, fought by 1,000 warriors of 100 nations. Izuku's gut was churning with the exertion, making him wish there was a real bathroom on the train and not an emergency cubby. One nation wanted him to run, to leave his bag and escape to the handicapped section, no matter how many gnarly looks were sent his way. Anything but confrontation. Speaking to Kaken was the losing condition of their war. Another nation wanted him to speak, to talk with the boy he'd looked up to all his childhood. It had been closing in on a year since he'd last seen the bigger boy, and he wanted to catch up with him. It didn't matter to this army that they'd barely held a conversation since they were 4, they just wanted to chat, to show off. There were warriors in that army, however, who defected to a third party. Each had their individual reasons, but they all recognized a singular truth. There were only 2 people Izuku had ever met who came close to his own obsession with All Might. One of them happened to be standing in front of him. None of these warriors dared face the man he indirectly hurt. These conflicting ideas forced stomach acid into Izuku's mouth like a geyser. Doubling over with his hand to his mouth, Izuku did everything to not throw up. Bakugo scooted away from him. "If ing quit that sheet. If you're gonna hurl, do it over there," he said, throwing a haphazard thumb over his shoulder, not noticing he was pointing at a PRD woman. She scooted over as well, giving both of them a dirty look. It took all of Izuku's strength to push his vomit back down, the effort sending him into a kneel. Sking in breaths like a dying man, Izuku kept his lunch in his stomach. Muttering curses under his breath, he took a glance around and wished he hadn't. Every person was staring at him like a particularly unpleasant bug. A PRDNT woman, primary schooler, salary man, and a man with a scar on his chin were giving him especially wary looks. He felt a shoe nudge his thigh. His eyes trailed from the sneaker, up a dark pant leg, to a shirt, and landed on the scrunched face of Bakugo. Can you FING stop? First, you effed up being saved by All Might, now you're at my commute? God. The boy grunted. Izuku blinked. The train disappeared. Thunder consumed every sense in his body. 1,000 million bolts of lightning struck his ears, spinning around him like blades on a fan. Or was he the one spinning? He tried standing, but he only managed to get to 1 foot before falling onto his side, helpless. Nothing he did could stop his lunch from escaping him. His self-control evaporated. What happened? Where was he? What happened to the train? Where the 4 passengers had been were 4 EMTs, and they were standing over him. 2 of them made to grab him. The plump one stood back. A man with a goatee tried shaking him. He surrendered himself to their efforts. Whatever happened to the train, whatever was happening to him, he could trust medical professionals to help. But they didn't. The 2 ones helping him up slammed him back down, the goatee man grabbing him by his neck. He squeezed Izuku tightly, not letting an ounce of air down his throat. He lifted Izuku an inch off the ground before slamming him back down, his head whipping against the crumbled, filthy concrete below. Why the F did you let this happen? What the F were you thinking, you little effing sheet? He said, continuing to strangle him. The plump EMT kicked him in his exposed side. The goatee man pulled his hands off his neck before backhanding him across the cheek. It hurt more than anything, more than getting kicked by Night Eye, more than getting shot, more than blowing his arm to pieces. It gave him a chance to breathe, though, and he took it. "I'm so sorry," Izuku tried to say before the plump EM kicked him in his crotch. "You fucker killed him. You ruined my life." She screamed. Izuku groaned, rolling over away from them. He shouldn't have. Where Katsuki Bakugo had been, All Might's corpse had taken its place. The man was far past putrefaction and was barely more than bones, yet a river of blood continued to seep out of him. He tried to cover his eyes from the stomach-churning sight, but when his hand touched his face, it came away bloody. He threw up again. Curling into a ball, he ignored the way the EMTs continued to grope and hit him, and he ignored the way the smell of copper permeated his nose and thunder filled his ears. He didn't know long he was curled into that ball. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. Days was pushing it, but not out of the question. Each punch and kick just made him curl tighter and tighter, forcing every sensation out of his head. He felt cold. Then, something in his gut shifted. A familiar warmth washed over his core, spreading out from his abdomen to his fingertips. He didn't uncurl, but he relaxed slightly. When someone touched his shoulder, he flinched. It was a well-manicured hand, feminine, wearing the same polish his mom did. There was a scent of vanilla on it, a vintage, inexpensive perfume. "Hey, honey. Come on, kid, it's just me. Everything's all right, 9, nothing will hurt you with me around." A feminine voice said. Blurry-eyed and jumpier than he'd ever felt, he peeked his head out from the crook of his elbow. The crumbling building around him disappeared. He wasn't on the train either. He was in the void like he often went to between dreams. 7 had a hand reached out to help him up, a soft smile on her face. Izuku sniffled, hesitant to take it. It took him a while, longer than it should have, for him to move. He continued to just stare up at Nana, unbelieving. It was all so surreal. His quirk had always spoken to him in his dreams. It whispered to him every night, but the past wielders had never come to him in the day. That wasn't what truly gave him pause, however. What made Izuku's heart flutter and chest squeeze was simply the expression of pure, unadulterated love that flowed off 7 in waves. It was different than anything he'd ever experienced, bar his mother. But his mother had never been confident in herself, and her affections mirrored that. Seven emanated confidence and pride in herself and him, and Izuku felt that difference. He took her hand. Katsuki Bakugo had never felt more uncomfortable in his life. For sure he'd felt worse. He'd broken his arm once, and it stopped him from using his quirk for 2 months. When All Might had died protecting some green-haired brat on national television, he cried for a week. Certainly he'd felt darker emotions than right now. But his sheer discomfort at Deku's public meltdown trounced anything he'd ever felt. He hadn't really meant anything by his comment, to be honest. It had just slipped out as his irritation grew. In fact, he was a little annoyed at himself for saying it, and not just because it led to the current situation. Katsuki probably was the only person besides his parents who knew that it had been Deku at that shopping mall on a fateful day. He'd recognized that Moss had anywhere. At first, he'd been inconsolable. He doubted it was possible to throw a bigger tantrum than what he did. Useless Deku had finally done it. Everyone at school knew he'd been a waste of space, that he only got in the way. Nobody had ever suspected, however, at just what scale he would be able to screw Sheet up. Sure, he ruined people's fun and annoyed just about everyone with his idle presence, but nobody thought it could be worse. Then he got FING All Might killed. Katsuki really, he should have been euthanized with how much Sheet he gave everyone in the fallout. He gets that? Nothing he did had been appropriate or even reasonable, to be honest. Nobody was safe from him, nothing was sacred. He just about did everything wrong, up to and including getting himself marked for public quirk usage. He'd been scot-free with it all his life, everyone knew he'd been destined for greatness. Nobody wanted to ruin that for him. Still, no one could ignore a tree being blown to smithereens in a public park. The one thing he never did, however, was snitch on the kid. No matter how much Katsuki FNG loathed Deku in those moments, he never told a soul. It just wouldn't have been right, even if the guy had earned it in his opinion. Maybe his morals had some screws loose, but it made sense to him. That was why his nails dug into his palm, forcing him to keep calm. Blood dribbled between his fingers, unbidden. Deku had almost immediately fallen apart when Katsuki had gone for his throat, clutching his head with an arm and rolling over on the floor. That was embarrassing enough, both knowing he caused it and as a second-hand embarrassment. What was worse was the dude's other arm had fallen off. Deku was an amputee, probably from when All Might got capped. And Katsuki had the brilliant maneuver to give him Sheet for it. Something ugly twisted around in his insides. Then the smoke had come. It had taken a few minutes of restless rolling and groaning, but it happened. Katsuki had been utterly dumbfounded when, after muttering some shitty apology out, he began emitting gas. It had started small, just leaking out of his orifices at first, but the output grew exponentially as time went on. Within 5 seconds, Deku's body had covered itself. Within 10, everyone in the cabin was struggling to breathe. The other shitty passengers had rushed to the corners and sunk to the ground, expecting the smoke to rise with the heat, but Katsuki knew better. This wasn't exhaust, this was static gas. Deku wasn't burning, he was simply emitting. He stood up on his seat, getting as tall as possible. "Get up high, morons!" He had barked, directing his glare at the Pyardini lady. "It's sinking." It would have been good advice, too, if Deku had just stopped emitting after a while, but he didn't. It only got worse. 5 minutes from their stop and no way to get fresh air, somebody called for help. Katsuki didn't catch if it was the police or the hero line, but it didn't matter. Ignoring the way his arms burned, he gathered the passenger in a corner and set off a few explosions, pushing the gas away. His palms were bloody and exhaustion made his quirk ache, but he knew for certain that the smoke wasn't combustible. Normally, he'd let the extras choke, but he couldn't let it slide for the Pyarjinanti chick. By the time the tunnel they were in opened back up into a station, Katsuki's arms felt like they were going to fall off. He tried to bang open the sliding doors early, but his strength was depleted. The scarred man tried to help him stay steady on his feet, but he shook himself off before Katsuki had the chance to. When the door opened, only one individual was standing at the ready. Waltzing in with the gusto of a fresh hire and the serenity of a vet, Katsuki groaned as the man gave him a wink. "Okay, listeners. Please, no need to worry. Ahem." Present Mike stepped in front of the crowded passengers, throwing them a peace sign. Izuku was still emitting smoke, but he looked like he'd sat up with some groggy clarity. The hero glanced back at the quintet, shooing them out of the cabin. A low humming rumbled in his throat. "Sorry, little listener," he said, his vocal cords warping halfway between his trademark voice and quirk. A half-sonic blast erupted out of his mouth, pushing all the excess smoke out the back end of the cabin. The windows nearest the man vibrated, but none broke, a sign of his massive restraint. Katsuki remembered a video of the man shattering stone with a scream once. Katsuki's last glance at Deku was brief, but it made his heart churn with guilt. The other passengers congratulated and thanked him for his help, but he shrugged them off. He didn't deserve sheep praise, he just tried to make up for causing it in the first place. He knew better than most just how bad he had it. Hisashi Yamada had been having a groovy day. Shoyuda had let him come over to pet his cats and Kiyama had agreed to come on his show. Plus, on top of all that, he'd rescued not just one, but 2 cats from trees today. Not every day was smooth sailing, but days like these were what he lived for. When he got a call for public quirk abuse, his day got a little worse, he wouldn't lie. Those cases were usually bull malarkey anyways, with quirk laws being so stingy, but once he heard the details, he rushed right over. A little listener in peril? 2 little listeners? 3, if you count the kid in the womb? Some poor civilians stuck in a hotbox they didn't sign up for? He was their man. Before he blasted all the smoke away, he'd thought the kid would have been older. 15 maybe. At least in high school, with the way the caller described how potent the quirk was. His heart sunk when he realized it wasn't even a teen. Barely a tween at that. The boy seemed to blink lazily, like he'd just woken up. He was puffy-eyed, and bruises ran across his neck. What drew Hisashi's attention the most, however, was the kid's arm. Gone below the delt. Definitely not a defect. The closer he got, the more obvious it had been. The little guy had a panic attack or something in the vein of one. It wasn't that uncommon, to be honest. Not even for just kids, but adults struggled too, and they often suffered the consequences. People with dangerous quirks were often regarded negatively, especially ones who weren't trained. To be honest, civilians with powerful quirks were generally viewed as badly as the quirkless, just for the complete opposite reasons. Protocol told him to report it to the police so they could handle it. They'd deal out the due punishment too, if the courts were busy. The protocol was bull malarkey though. Putting his hands up, Hisashi made a show of his slow approach, announcing himself before he got close. Hey little listener. How we feelin'?" he asked. The boy's gaze dropped to his hand as if he was surprised by something. His tiny shoulders athletic, he noticed, shook. Tears freely flowed down his face, but he wasn't sniffling. "Well, I can't say that clears anything up, but that's all right. How about we just sit down and chill?" he said, before getting crisscross applesauce. The train, he noted, wasn't scheduled to leave for another 10 minutes. He'd just shoo off anyone who tried to get on. The kid didn't say anything, but he shifted into a half crisscross, 1 foot planted on the floor. He hugged the one on his chest. "Are you gonna arrest me?" the kid asked in a small voice. Hisashi smiled. So they could speak. "I dunno. Do you want to be arrested?" he asked, putting as many good vibes as he could into his reply. The kid shook his head. "No. All right." "Huh." Present Mike smiled. The kid looked surprised. He must have been sure of his fate. "It's your lucky day, kiddo. Only a butthead stickler arrests a kid for stuff like this. I'm no cop either," he said, winking. The boy studied his shoes. "But I broke the law. Maybe I hurt someone." The kid said, "Yeah, nah. Yeah, you broke the law, but the passengers were fine. The blonde kid had some spunk though. So why aren't you arresting me?" "I broke the law." Hisashi stifled a laugh. The kid really was a rules Ryan. "Little listener, the job isn't about punishing people. It's about helping. You seem to need more help than those other fellas, and the idea of putting a polite bloke like you in HFFS ruffles my feathers." At that, the boy finally looked up at him, as if seeing him for the first time. His eyes were a pleasant pine green with freckles to match. His mouth opened into an O shape as if the entire conversation only just registered. Your present, Mike. I like your show, he said, a wobbly smile on his face. Hisashi nodded, putting on an air of pride. The one and only. So you were an actual listener. This does pose a problem, however, he announced. The boy winced in retaliation, afraid that the other shoe was about to drop. Hisashi held in a chuckle. You know my name. But I am in the dark about yours. Who are you, listener, and what are you about? He said, false charisma rolling off him. Oh, Izuku Midoriya. Maybe a future hero? Presently MS. He mumbled, stumbling over his words. Hisashi chortled. Hey, the kid was funny. I like the cut of your jib, kid. Hey, you want some ice cream, Mr. Future Hero? We can call your mom after. They left the cabin soon after, with present Mike being sure to get the contact information out of the witnesses. He doubted they'd spill about little Midoriya, but by pulling a few strings, this'll all blow over by next week. Nizu would make sure of it as a favor to Hisashi. They both got mint, with Midoriya getting a second scoop. Inko was rubbing slow circles into Izuku's arm as he slept, curled up in her side. When Izuku's number had rung on her phone, she hadn't expected such a boisterous voice to come through. A mix of worry and excitement had shot through her. Why was a hero calling her, using her son's phone? He seemed so pleasant, however, so her anxiety alarms didn't trigger immediately. That changed when he told her the situation. She barely waited to tell her boss she was taking off the rest of the day, or to text her second boss that she wouldn't be coming in tomorrow. Present Mike had been an absolute angel, offering to escort Izuku home while she rushed back herself. Inko needed to start thinking about what she was going to do for all these heroes her son ran into. They all were just so amazing and helpful, she didn't know what to do with herself. She'd expected the worst when they met up. She practically expected Izuku to be catatonic, wrapped in 1,000,001 bandages. It was a pleasant surprise to see him snacking on a mint ice cream, but it hadn't eased her worries. Her baby was still standoffish, even more than usual. Wrapping him up in the biggest hug she could muster, she held him as long as she could. Present Mike had the sense to look away. He didn't accept her money when she tried to reimburse him, stating it'd be rude to accept payment for a gift. That was when the waterworks started for her. She shook his hand 1,000 times, bowing twice for each before he left. Holding Izuku as close as possible as she ferried him back upstairs, she spotted a black smudge on his shirt. She was about to wipe it off before she realized what it was. A signature. That was it, she decided. Put Your Hands Up Radio was receiving an anonymous wine basket. Inko spent the rest of the afternoon coddling and comforting Izuku. The impression from present Mike had been a casual one, but he was sure to inform her of the gravity of what could have been. Izuku had a public quirk-infused meltdown, and it was only by his grace that he wasn't spending the night in police holdings. She should have kissed the man's shoes. More than once. They barely spoke, even by the time of sundown. Izuku seemed to be content to just be wrapped in a blanket burrito with his mom and watch television. Of course, she couldn't let it stay that way forever, but tonight? No problem. She'd message Fujimaki tomorrow and ask him for an earlier appointment slot this week. Inko's qualifications in this department began and ended with motherly comfort. In the early weeks, meltdowns had been common. There was no way to tell the severity of today's, but her intuition told her it had been bad. Awful. Her boy hadn't been this quiet since his physical therapy with the Utsushimis. They watched his favorite movies, a pentalogy about early quirk Korean vigilantes. It was nice, they were cheesy, but they were fun enough that even she enjoyed them. She pressed a hand behind his head and played with her quirk, pulling popcorn into his mouth. It was towards the end of the fourth movie that she got a text. It was from a different app than work, so she didn't have any real reason to ignore it. Inko paused as she read the name. Night Eye and hers texting history was the length of her phone screen, which was on the smaller end. Basic inquiries on schedule and finance made up the bulk of it. The most recent message was a quarter of her whole screen, apologizing for the Tokage incident. Surprise gripped her as she realized it wasn't another scheduling request. Mirai Sasaki, Night Eye, Izuku is not answering his phone, but I see his location is with you. Please let him know at your next convenience that I've scheduled a meeting with Professor Sasami Fujimaki. Her office is close to mine, and she asked to meet him face to face. Friday at 11 a.m. Inko stared at the message, not comprehending any of it. She swiped on her phone for the date. It was Tuesday. Why would a professor want to speak to her son? Why would Night Eye care? Inko Midoriya, I'm sorry, sir, but I'm afraid I don't understand. Why would you do that? Also, my son is in a bad spot right now. I don't know if he'll be able to make it. Mirai Sasaki, Night Eye, I am sorry to hear that. He seemed very chipper at noon. May I ask what happened? Inko Midoriya, I'm not sure, but I suspect a flashback. Aiza's been quiet ever since. Mirai Sasaki, Night Eye, alright, well, I can reschedule if necessary, but Sasami is a difficult woman to pin down, so I hope he will be able to pull through. Inko Midoriya, I suppose I agree, but I still don't understand. Why you playing middleman for this? Night Eye took a while to respond. Inko didn't press him for answers. The man was notoriously busy, even without knowing the man somewhat personally. They were a quarter through the final movie and out of popcorn when he replied again. She decided that she was definitely speaking to Night Eye, and erased that silly question mark. It had been a leftover from when they'd first contacted another. Mirai Sasaki, I presume you are away of the boy's hero notebooks, yes? Well, he handed me and Sorahiko one about himself, and I couldn't help but be impressed. Simply put, his observations are above mine, and I felt that putting him against the best in Japan would be a good measuring stick. I am under the impression that he is taking classes far out of his age range? Inko Midoriya, yes sir. He's doing remarkably well with his studies despite all the malarkey you put him through. That was a bit of a stretch, Inko thought. She wasn't privy to what they did with Izuku every day, but she saw the aftermath. She had to wash his clothes. Bruises, scrapes, throw-up, and massive sweat stains were becoming increasingly less concerning. Inko didn't like becoming numb to it, but if her baby seemed content as he often did after a good day with Night Eye, she let it slide. Mirai Sasaki, the fruits of his efforts are already starting to show. Still, I believe that the current trajectory of his academic path is equally important, especially his knack for quark theory. Perhaps nothing will come of it, but we all agreed to give Izuku time with this woman. I'll need an answer by tomorrow if I'll need to reschedule. Have a nice night, Mim. Night Eye's green icon dulled to gray, and that was that. She let the conversation roll around in her head while she fiddled with her phone, swiping to her message hub. Izuku's icon was green. Peering down at her little boy, she felt her heart warm. Izuku must have fallen asleep on her side in the last minute or so. The Messenger app was still open, and on at the top of his screen was a little pterosaur icon.